My husband drained our joint account to fund his girlfriend's dreams. What he forgot was that I owned 51% of his precious startup. By morning, he'd be the one with nothing but regrets. The notification lit up my phone at 3:17 a.m. In the darkness of our bedroom, our half-empty bedroom since Daniel had been working late for the third week straight, the blue glow illuminated the ceiling as I fumbled to silence it. Balance alert. Account ending in 4872 below minimum threshold. I blinked, confused. That was impossible. Our joint savings account had contained just over $287,000 yesterday afternoon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The careful accumulation of 8 years of marriage, countless overtime shifts at the hospital where I worked as a surgical nurse, and the discipline to save rather than spend. It was our safety net, our future home down payment, our someday fund. With suddenly trembling fingers, I opened the banking app. The balance stared back at me. $412.78, $287,000. Gone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin around me as I sat up, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. There had to be a mistake, a banking error, a glitch in the system. I scrolled through the recent transactions, and that's when I saw it. A single withdrawal, timestamped 11:42 p.m., transfer to account ending 9336. The account number wasn't familiar, but the authorization signature was Daniel Mercer. My husband of 8 years had emptied our joint savings without a word, without a warning, without my consent. Computer error, I whispered to myself, desperately seeking any explanation other than the one hammering at my consciousness. It has to be. With shaking hands, I called Daniel's cell. It went straight to voicemail, his cheerful greeting at odds with the ice forming in my stomach. I tried again, and again. Nothing. I opened our message thread and typed, "The bank says, our savings account is empty. Please call me immediately." The message showed as delivered, but the minutes ticked by with no response, no explanation, no denial. As the first pale rays of dawn crept through the blinds, painting stripes across our marital bed, the bed that had felt too large, too empty for weeks now, a strange calm began to settle over me. The panic receded, replaced by something harder, colder, more focused. I knew where Daniel was, or at least I knew who he was with. Her name was Vanessa Miller. She'd started as TechVault's new marketing director 4 months ago. Daniel's precious startup, his baby, the company he'd poured his heart and soul into for the past 3 years, had finally started gaining traction. They needed someone to elevate their brand, he'd said. Someone who understood the vision. What he hadn't said was that she would become his vision. That her glossy dark hair and MBA would become more important than the vows we'd exchanged on a sunlit beach in Maui, with the waves crashing behind us and promises of forever on our lips. I'd seen the signs but had chosen to ignore them. The Kai, late nights, the weekend emergency meetings, the sudden password changes on his laptop and phone, the way he angled his screen away when I entered the room, the scent of unfamiliar perfume that clung to his shirts, a scent that spoke of sandalwood and betrayal. It's just work stress, I'd told myself, even as something inside me recognized the lie. But this was undeniable. This was $287,000 worth of undeniable. I rose from the bed, a strange energy coursing through my veins. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about theft, about violation, about the casual dismantling of our shared future by the one person who had promised to protect it. As I stood under the shower, letting the scalding water wash over me, my mind cleared. The shock crystallized into something sharper, more defined. The surgical nurse in me took over, assessing the damage, prioritizing the response, formulating a plan of action with clinical precision. Daniel had made a critical error, a potentially catastrophic oversight that his MIT-educated brain should have caught if it hadn't been clouded by whatever promises Vanessa had whispered in his ear. TechVault, his precious startup, wasn't solely his. It was ours. 3 years ago, when Daniel had first pitched his idea for a revolutionary cloud security platform, it had been my $150,000 inheritance from my grandmother that provided the seed funding. My parents had been appalled. "You're throwing away your security on his pipe dream." But I'd believed in him, in us, and I'd been smart enough, or perhaps just cautious enough, to insist on proper documentation. 51% ownership, in my name. A controlling interest that Daniel had laughingly agreed to, kissing me and saying, "It's just a formality, Ellie. This company is ours, just like everything else." Apparently, everything else had included Vanessa Miller. As I dried off and dressed with mechanical precision, dark jeans, crisp white button-down, the sleek blazer I reserved for parent-teacher conferences at my son Aiden's school, I opened my laptop and navigated to our financial portal. The one. Daniel thought I never checked because I wasn't interested in the business side of things. There it was. TechVault's latest valuation after their Series A funding, $8.4 million. And there, in black and white, Eleanor Mercer, majority shareholder, 51%. My phone chimed with an incoming message. "Daniel, finally. Ella, I can explain. We need to talk. It's not what you think." I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Not what I think? What exactly did he imagine I was thinking? That he'd donated our life savings to orphaned puppies? Another message followed quickly. "The money is just temporarily moved. A short-term investment opportunity. I was going to tell you once it paid off." The lie was so transparent, so insulting to my intelligence, that something inside me hardened, even further. I had given this man 8 years of my life, had supported his dreams while putting my own advanced nursing degree on hold, had carried and raised our son while he chased his ambitions. And this was how he repaid that loyalty? With theft and lies? I typed back a single word. "Where?" The reply came quickly. "Meeting Vanessa for breakfast at Westlake Inn to discuss TechVault's rebranding. Please, Elle, let me explain before you do anything." Westlake Inn, the luxury boutique hotel on the edge of town. The one with the 700 per night suites and champagne service. The one where, apparently, rebranding discussions happened, over breakfast. I set down the phone and looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the trusting, supportive Ellie who had cheerfully packed Daniel's lunches and listened to his startup woes. This woman had eyes like flint and a jaw set in determination. This woman knew exactly what needed to be done. I picked up the phone again, but instead of responding to Daniel, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, Rebecca Caldwell. My college roommate, now one of the most ruthless corporate attorneys in the state. "Beck," I said when she answered, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I need your help. Daniel emptied our accounts and is with another woman. And he's forgotten one very important detail about his company." Rebecca's voice was instantly alert, the sleep vanishing from it. "What detail, Ellie?" "I own 51% of it." The silence on the other end was brief, followed by a low whistle. Well, looks like Daniel's about to learn an expensive lesson in mathematics." I could hear the rustle of sheets, the sounds of her getting up. "Give me 30 minutes. Don't do anything until I get there. And Ellie?" "Yes?" "Don't respond to any more of his messages. Evidence matters." I ended the call and stared out the window at the peaceful suburban street below. Our neighbors were just beginning to stir. Mr. Garrison retrieving his newspaper, Mrs. Patterson walking her poodle. Normal people starting normal days, unaware that just yards away, my world was imploding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But even as grief threatened to overwhelm me, the cold, clear voice of reason cut through the chaos. Daniel had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. Had stolen our security, our future, our trust. And for what? For Vanessa Miller and her sandalwood perfume? For whatever promises of excitement or understanding she'd offered? I opened my nightstand drawer and removed a small leather portfolio. Inside were the documents I'd insisted we keep copies of at home, just in case. Articles of incorporation, ownership agreements, board resolutions, all bearing my signature alongside Daniel's, all confirming what he seemed to have conveniently forgotten. Tech Vault wasn't his to gamble with. As I spread the documents across the bed we'd shared for 8 years, a plan began to form. Daniel thought he had all the power, thought he could simply take what he wanted and discard the rest. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. My phone chimed again with another message from him. "Elle, please. I can fix this. Just give me a chance to explain." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my contacts again and made 2 more calls. The first to my brother, Michael, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing hidden assets during high-net-worth divorces. The second to Aiden's school, arranging for him to spend the day with his best friend's family. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This wasn't even just about the affair. This was about reclaiming what was mine, my dignity, my security, my future. And if Daniel had forgotten who really held the power in our relationship, in his precious company, then it was time for a reminder. By the time Rebecca's sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway 40 minutes later, I was calm, focused, and ready. The documents were organized. My mind was clear. The path forward was crystallizing with each passing moment. "Ready?" Rebecca asked as I slid into the passenger seat, the leather portfolio clutched against my chest like armor. I took one last look at the house Daniel and I had bought together, the house where we'd brought Aiden home from the hospital, where we'd hosted barbecues and Christmas parties and built what I'd thought was an unshakable life. "Yes," I said, turning away from the memories. "I'm ready." Daniel Mercer had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He'd emptied our account for his girlfriend, but he'd forgotten who really owned his startup. By sunset, he would understand exactly what that oversight was going to cost him. Rebecca's Mercedes cut through morning traffic with the same precision she applied to her legal arguments. I sat beside her, clutching my leather portfolio, my mind replaying the moments when my life had still made sense. Just yesterday, I had been Eleanor Mercer, surgical nurse, mother to a bright 7-year-old boy, and wife to a tech entrepreneur, on the verge of making it big. My life had followed a predictable rhythm: early morning shifts at St. Vincent's Hospital, afternoon carpool duty for Aiden's soccer practice, and evenings spent preparing meals that often went uneaten as Daniel worked later and later at Tech Vault's downtown office. "When did you first suspect something was wrong?" Rebecca asked, her eyes never leaving the road. I stared out the window, watching suburban houses give way to the glass and steel landscape of downtown. There were signs for months: the late nights, the missed dinners, the way he'd take calls in another room. And the money? When did you last check the account balance? 3 days ago. Everything was normal. I felt a hollow laugh escape my lips. Or what I thought was normal. 3 days ago, I'd been planning our summer vacation. 3 days ago, I'd been researching school options for Aiden's upcoming year. 3 days ago, I'd still believed in my marriage. "We were supposed to close on a lake house next month," I said quietly. "Our dream getaway. Somewhere Aiden could learn to fish with his dad. Somewhere I could finally write that nursing textbook I've been talking about for years." Rebecca nodded, her expression softening for just a moment. The lake house down payment. Was that what the money was for? Part of it. The rest was our emergency fund, Aiden's college savings, and the investment capital we'd been setting aside for Tech Vault's expansion. My voice caught. Everything we've worked for since we got married. And Daniel had full access to all of it? We've always had joint accounts. The words tasted bitter now. We believed in building our life together. No secrets, no separate finances. A partnership. Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Some partnership. The Westlake Inn rose before us, a boutique hotel of brick and ivy, discreetly elegant, in the morning light. The kind of place where an affair could flourish under the guise of business meetings, where a man could reimagine his future while discarding his past. Rebecca pulled into the parking lot, cutting the engine. "Are you certain you want to confront him here? We could approach this more formally, through legal channels." I checked my phone. Daniel had sent 5 more increasingly desperate texts, each one more insistent that there was a simple explanation, that I was jumping to conclusions, that everything could be fixed if I'd just be reasonable. "I need to see his face," I said. "I need to see him try to lie to me in person." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then let's make sure you're protected." She pulled a small recorder from her purse. "Missouri is a one-party consent state. Keep this in your pocket. If he makes any admissions about the money, the affair, anything, we'll have it documented." As we stepped out of the car, I caught sight of Daniel's Tesla in the parking lot, positioned prominently near the entrance. Always concerned with appearances, my husband. Always making sure people saw his success. Next to it was a sleek red Audi. I didn't recognize. The vanity plate read Viensam. My stomach lurched. It was one thing to suspect, another to know, and still another to see the physical evidence of their relationship sitting boldly in public view. "That's her car, isn't it?" Rebecca asked, following my gaze. I nodded, unable to speak. "Ellie, listen, to me." Rebecca turned me to face her, her hands firm on my shoulders. "What happens in the next hour will set the tone for everything that follows. If you fall apart, if you let emotion drive this encounter, Daniel will use it against you. He'll paint you as irrational, unstable, vindictive. I'm none of those things. I know that. But men like Daniel, men who can justify stealing from their wives, abandoning their children, betraying their vows, they're remarkably skilled at rewriting the narrative, at making themselves the victims." Her eyes hardened. "Don't give him that opportunity." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the recorder in my pocket. "I won't." We walked through the ornate lobby, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The hotel restaurant, Westlake Bistro, sprawled before us, white linen tablecloths, fresh flowers at each table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a manicured garden. It was half empty at this hour, making it easy to spot them. Daniel and Vanessa sat at a corner table, heads bent close together over what looked like marketing materials. His hand rested on hers, casually, intimately, as though it belonged there. As though 8 years of marriage had never happened. Even from a distance, I could see she was beautiful. Younger than me, with a polished, curated look that spoke of time and money invested in self-presentation. Her dark hair fell in glossy waves around a heart-shaped face. Her suit, cream-colored and impeccably tailored, probably cost more than I made in a week. Daniel looked happy, animated, engaged in a way he hadn't been with me for months. The sight of it was like a physical blow. "Stay focused," Rebecca murmured beside me. "Remember why we're here." I straightened my shoulders and walked toward their table, each step reshaping me. By the time Daniel looked up and saw me approaching, the shock registering on his face, I was no longer just Ellie, the supportive wife. I was Eleanor Mercer, majority shareholder of Tech Vault Security Solutions, and I had come to claim what was mine. "Ellie!" Daniel stood abruptly, knocking his water glass over. It spilled across the pristine tablecloth, soaking the marketing documents. "What What are you doing here? Hello, Daniel. My voice was calm, steadier than I'd expected. I turned to the woman beside him, whose perfectly glossed lips had parted in surprise. You must be Vanessa Miller. I'm Eleanor Mercer, Daniel's wife. The color drained from Daniel's face. Ellie, this isn't what it looks like. I finished for him. It rarely is it? Just like our empty savings account isn't what it looks like. Just like the hotel room you undoubtedly shared last night isn't what it looks like. Vanessa's eyes widened, darting between us. She began gathering the wet documents, her manicured hands trembling slightly. Daniel, perhaps I should go. No, I said, my voice cutting through the awkward tension. Please stay, Ms. Miller. This concerns you too, considering you're apparently the beneficiary of my family's savings. Daniel stepped toward me, lowering his voice. Ellie, please. Not here. We can discuss this at home. We don't have a home. Anymore, Daniel. What we had was a marriage built on trust, and you've destroyed that. I gestured to Rebecca, who stood slightly behind me. This is Rebecca Caldwell, my attorney. You might remember her from our wedding. She was a bridesmaid. Daniel's face paled further as recognition dawned. Becky? Look, this is all a misunderstanding. It's Rebecca, she corrected coolly. And I think the only misunderstanding here is yours, Daniel. Specifically about the legal and financial consequences of what you've done. A waiter approached, sensing the tension. Is everything all right here? No, I said simply. But it will be. Could we have some privacy, please? The waiter nodded and retreated. Around us, the few other diners pretended not to watch, but their attention was palpable. Daniel glanced around nervously, then gestured to the empty chair. Sit down, Ellie. Please, let's talk like adults. I remained standing. Where is our money, Daniel? He swallowed hard. I told you, it's a temporary investment. In what? In whom? I nodded toward Vanessa, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Is she the investment? Is that what our son's college fund paid for? What our future was sacrificed for? Don't bring Aiden into this, Daniel hissed. You brought him into this the moment you decided your desires were more important than his. Security. I placed my leather portfolio on the table and removed the top document, a bank statement showing the massive withdrawal. $287,000. Gone. Without discussion. Without my consent. Vanessa's eyes widened as she saw the figure. She turned to Daniel, alarm evident in her expression. Daniel, you told me, Vanessa, not now. He cut her off sharply. Interesting. So there were already cracks in paradise. She hadn't known where the money came from. I want it back, I said simply. All of it. By the end of business. Today. Daniel laughed, though there was no humor in it. Or what, Ellie? You'll tell my mother? File for divorce? This isn't like you. You're making a scene over a temporary financial decision. Theft, Rebecca interjected calmly. The legal term for taking someone else's money without permission is theft. Or in this case, since you were in a position of trust with joint access, it could be classified as embezzlement. The smugness drained from Daniel's face. That's ridiculous. We're married. It's our money. Missouri law disagrees, Rebecca said, removing another document from her briefcase. Particularly when one spouse empties a joint account without consent and transfers the funds to a third party. She nodded toward Vanessa, whose face had gone from uncomfortable to alarmed. No one transferred money to me, Vanessa said quickly. Raised an eyebrow. Then where is it, Daniel? Where exactly is our life savings right now? Daniel's jaw tightened. The arrogance I'd glimpsed earlier, that certainty that he could talk his way out of anything, was fading, replaced by something closer to fear. It's in a new business account, he finally admitted. For Vision Tech Marketing, Vanessa's new agency. She's going to handle TechVault's rebranding and expansion. It's a strategic investment in our future. Our future, I repeated. The words hollow. And when exactly did our future stop including me? Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or merely annoyance at being caught. Ellie, you've never cared about the business. You've always been focused on your nursing, on... Aiden, I made a decision for TechVault's benefit. Without consulting the majority shareholder? That seems like an interesting approach to corporate governance. I removed the final document from my portfolio, the ownership agreement with my 51% stake highlighted in yellow. You seem to have forgotten something rather important, Daniel, as... He stared at the document. I saw the moment realization dawned. The moment he remembered that in his rush to secure funding 3 years ago, he had signed over controlling interest to me in exchange for my inheritance. That was just a formality, he said weakly. We agreed. We agreed on a lot of things, Daniel. Fidelity, honesty, partnership. I let the words hang in the air before continuing. Things change. The silence that followed felt endless. Around us, the restaurant's ambient noise, quiet conversations, the clink of silverware, soft background music, seemed to fade away, leaving only the three of us suspended in a moment of terrible clarity. Daniel stared at the ownership document, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine: disbelief, anger, fear, calculation. Vanessa glanced between us, the perfect composure of her makeup and clothing at odds with the growing panic in her eyes. You wouldn't, Daniel finally said, his voice low. TechVault is my life's work, my vision. You've never even been interested in what we do. And yet, I replied, I own 51%. Something shifted in his expression then. A hardening, a retreat behind walls I hadn't known existed between us. The man looking at me now wasn't the Daniel who had proposed on one knee in Central Park, or the one who had wept when he first held Aiden. This was a stranger calculating odds, assessing vulnerabilities, looking for escape routes. Let's discuss this privately, he said, rising from his chair. Vanessa, I'll call you later. Vanessa gathered her belongings with trembling hands. Daniel, what is happening? You told me the money was from your private investments. It was. He cut her off sharply. Ellie is just upset and lashing out. I'll handle this. I turned to Vanessa, really seeing her now. Not just the glossy exterior, but the fear beneath it. Maybe she wasn't the villain I'd imagined. Maybe she was just another person Daniel had manipulated, had lied to. The money Daniel gave you came from our joint savings account, I said quietly. Money we've been saving for 8 years, for our son's education, for our retirement, for our future. Her perfectly mascaraed eyes widened. I didn't, he said. She turned to Daniel, horror dawning on her face. You said it was your investment portfolio. You said your wife knew all about our plans. Daniel's jaw tightened. Not here, Vanessa. We'll discuss this later. Later. Her voice rose slightly. Daniel, you told me your marriage was essentially over, that she'd agreed to an amicable separation once TechVault went public. You said, she didn't want any part of the business side of things. Vanessa! Daniel's sharp tone cut through her rising panic. I felt something shift inside me. Not just anger at Daniel, but a strange, unexpected pity for this woman. She'd been played too. Differently, perhaps, but just as thoroughly. I never agreed to any separation, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This is the first I'm hearing of it. As for the business side of things, I may have let Daniel take the lead, but that doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. I gestured to the documents on the table. Clearly, Vanessa's perfect composure crumbled. She grabbed her designer handbag and stood abruptly. I can't be part of this. Whatever this is, I didn't sign up for it. Vanessa, wait. Daniel reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Don't contact me until this is resolved. Her eyes, now bright with unshed tears, darted to me. I swear I didn't know about the money, or that things weren't as he described. Before Daniel could respond, she turned and walked swiftly toward the exit, her high heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. The sound echoed in the suddenly quiet restaurant, punctuating her departure like exclamation points. Daniel watched her go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to me, and the mask dropped completely. Fury replaced calculation, raw and unfiltered. Are you happy now? He hissed. Is this what you wanted? To humiliate me in public? To ruin everything I've built? Rebecca stepped forward slightly. I think that's enough, Daniel. Eleanor has every right to— Stay out of this, Rebecca, he snapped. This is between me and my wife. Your wife, I repeated, the words feeling strange on my tongue. The one you stole from. The one you lied to. The one you were planning to discard once TechVault went public. Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or merely annoyance at being caught in another lie. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the sacrifices I've had to make for the company, for our future. Our future, I echoed. There's that phrase again. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. Let's go somewhere private to talk. Just you and me, Ellie, without the legal theatrics. He shot a pointed look at Rebecca. It was tempting, so tempting, to retreat into the familiar dynamic, to let him explain, to listen to his justifications, to try to understand, to fall back into the role of supportive wife, the one who smoothed over rough edges and made everything work. But the document on the table grounded me. The empty bank account, the lies about our marriage being over, some bridges couldn't be rebuilt once burned. There's nothing to discuss in private that can't be said here, I replied, gesturing for Rebecca to stay. Where is our money, Daniel? The exact account details. I want it transferred back today. His jaw tightened. It's not that simple. The funds have been allocated to Vanessa's new marketing agency. Yes, you mentioned that. An agency that, until 5 minutes ago, she seemed to think was being funded by your personal investment portfolio, not our joint savings. It was a strategic business move, he insisted. Vision Tech is going to handle TechVault's expansion. The return on investment will be— How much of our money is left? I cut in. He hesitated. What do you mean? How much of the $287,000 is still in? Vision Tech's account? How much has already been spent? The silence that followed told me everything. It's gone, I said flatly. All of it. In 3 days. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Not gone, invested. In office space, equipment, staffing. Vision Tech is going to transform TechVault's market presence. We're on the verge of something huge, Ellie. The casual we struck me like a physical blow. In his mind, he and Vanessa were now the we. I had been replaced, not just in his heart, but in his vision of the future. For the first time since the bank notification had woken me at 3:17 a.m., I felt tears threaten. The full weight of what had happened, what was still happening, crashed over me. 8 years of marriage, a child together, countless shared dreams and sacrifices and struggles. All of it meant nothing compared to whatever future Daniel had imagined with Vanessa. I blinked hard, refusing to let him see me cry. TechVault's board of directors will be very interested to hear about this unauthorized diversion of company resources, he scoffed. What board? It's just you and me and my college roommate Trevor, who owns 5%, and Trevor will back me on this. He always does. Actually, Rebecca interjected smoothly, as majority shareholder, Eleanor has the authority to reconstitute the board as she sees fit. Corporate Bylaws, Section 4.3. She tapped another document in her briefcase. I took the liberty of reviewing them this morning. Daniel's face paled. You can't be serious. Tech Vault is mine. It's always been mine. You've never even attended a board meeting. That's about to change, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. For a moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not just for the company, but perhaps, for the first time, fear of me, of what I might do with the power he'd forgotten I possessed. Ellie, he said, his tone shifting to something softer, almost pleading. Think about what you're doing. Think about Aiden, about our family. The mention of our son's name was like a knife to my heart. How dare he invoke Aiden now, after everything? I am thinking about Aiden, I said quietly. About the father who stole his college fund to impress his girlfriend. About the example you're setting for our son. Daniel flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not fair. I love Aiden. I would never hurt him. But you have. The tears I'd been fighting finally spilled over, tracing hot paths down my cheeks. You've hurt all of us. And there it was. The raw, wounded heart of it. Beyond the money, beyond the betrayal, beyond the lies. He had taken our family, the precious, imperfect, beautiful thing we'd built together, and shattered it for something shiny and new. In that moment of vulnerability, with tears streaming unchecked down my face, I saw something shift in Daniel's expression. A softening, a flash of the man I'd married. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Ellie, please. We can fix this. All of it. I made a terrible mistake. I pulled my hand away. Which mistake, Daniel? Emptying our accounts? Lying about our marriage being over? Planning to push me out once the company went public? Or just getting caught? His outstretched hand fell to the table. The momentary vulnerability vanished from his eyes, replaced by something colder, more calculating. If you go through with this, he said quietly, if you use your majority stake against me, you'll destroy everything. The company will never survive without me at the helm. The investors, the clients, they believe in me, not you. Perhaps, I acknowledged, wiping away my tears with steady fingers. But I'm willing to take that risk. I gathered my documents and stood. You have until 5 p.m. to return our money. All of it. Or tomorrow morning I'll call an emergency board meeting to discuss your unauthorized use of company resources and breach of fiduciary duty. Daniel stared up at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. You wouldn't. I looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time. Not as my husband, or Aiden's father, or even as the brilliant entrepreneur I'd supported for years, but as the man who had taken my trust and twisted it into a weapon against me. You have no idea what I would or wouldn't do anymore, Daniel, I said softly. That's the thing about betrayal. It changes people. As Rebecca and I walked away, leaving him sitting alone at the table strewn with coffee cups and shattered illusions, I felt something break free inside me. The tears were real, the pain was real, but beneath it all was a steely determination I hadn't known I possessed. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. The morning air felt different as Rebecca and I exited the Westlake Inn. Cleaner. Somehow, as though a storm had passed through and cleared away stagnation I hadn't even recognized. My tears had dried, leaving behind a strange clarity that cut through the fog of shock and disbelief. You did well in there, Rebecca said as we approached her car. Better than most would have in your position. I shook my head. I cried. You showed emotion, she corrected. There's a difference between vulnerability and weakness, Ellie. What matters is that you stood your ground. As we drove away from the hotel, I watched it recede in the side mirror, the elegant brick facade growing, smaller, housing the moment my marriage had officially shattered. Not in the early hours when I'd discovered the empty account, not in the weeks of suspicion before that, but in those final moments when Daniel had revealed the calculation behind his actions. The cold assessment that I was an obstacle to be managed, rather than a partner to be respected. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Rebecca glanced at me before returning her attention to the road. "Now we prepare for two possibilities. 1. Daniel returns the money by 5 o'clock, and we move forward with divorce proceedings, using his documented financial misconduct to secure your interests. And the second possibility? He doesn't return the money, and we execute the corporate strategy. Emergency board meeting, removal as CEO, possible criminal charges for misappropriation of funds." She paused. "It would effectively end his career in tech. No one invests in a founder with that kind of history. The weight of that power, the ability to dismantle everything Daniel had built, settled uncomfortably on my shoulders. I had supported his dreams for so long, had believed in Tech Vault's mission, even when investors had scoffed at his initial pitches. The idea of being the instrument of its destruction felt wrong somehow, despite everything. "There must be a middle path," I said. "One that holds him accountable without destroying the company." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "There could be. But first, we need to secure your financial position and protect Aiden's future. Everything else is negotiable." As we pulled into the driveway of my brother Michael's home, I was struck by how ordinary the day appeared. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional dog walker or delivery person disturbing the suburban tranquility. Inside these houses, people were living their normal lives, unaware that just a few doors down, mine had imploded. Michael was waiting on the porch, his expression grim. At 38, my older brother had always been my protector, from playground bullies to my first heartbreak. The forensic accountant in him might be what I needed professionally, but it was the brother in him I craved emotionally. "I got your message," he said, pulling me into a tight hug as soon as I stepped from the car. "Tell me what that bastard did." Inside, over strong coffee and the comfort of his familiar kitchen, I relayed the morning's events, while Michael listened intently, his accountant's mind clearly tracking the financial implications, even as his eyes flashed with brotherly outrage. "The money's gone, isn't it?" he finally said. "Not just transferred, spent." I nodded. Daniel admitted as much. Office space, equipment, staffing for Vanessa's new agency. In 3 days? Michael looked, skeptical. "That's not how business expenses work, especially for a new startup. Something doesn't add up." Rebecca set down her coffee mug. "What are you thinking, Michael?" "I'm thinking we need to follow the money." He stood, moving to his home office, and returning with his laptop. "No one legitimately spends that amount that quickly. Either the funds are still sitting in accounts somewhere, or what?" I prompted when he trailed off. "Or there's something else going on." His fingers flew across the keyboard. "Ellie, what's the name of Vanessa's new company again?" "Vision Tech. Marketing," I supplied. "Daniel said it was formed to handle Tech Vault's expansion." Michael's brow furrowed as he typed. "Established 3 months ago, according to the Secretary of State's business registry. Not 3 days ago. 3 months ago." The implication hit me like a physical blow. Daniel's been planning this for months? "It gets better," Michael continued, his expression darkening. "The registered agent isn't Vanessa Miller. It's Daniel Mercer." Rebecca leaned forward. "He created her company?" "He created a shell company," Michael corrected, "with himself as the controlling interest. Vanessa Miller is listed as CEO, but the ownership structure—" He turned the laptop so we could see the documents he'd pulled up. "Daniel Mercer controls 80% of Vision Tech marketing." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "He hasn't just been having an affair," I said slowly. "He's been setting up a parallel business structure, one that he controls completely. One that he funded with your joint savings," Rebecca added, her legal mind clearly racing. "But why?" TechVault is on the verge of a major valuation increase with the Series A funding. Why risk everything now? Michael scrolled through more documents. Because of the funding structure, the new investors would dilute his ownership percentage. But if TechVault has an exclusive marketing contract with Vision Tech, then he still controls the revenue stream, Rebecca finished, through the marketing agency. Which he funded with our money, I added, the full scope of his betrayal becoming clear. Money I helped earn. Money for Aiden's future. Michael nodded, grimly. And I'd bet my license that there's a sweetheart deal in place. TechVault paying well above market rate to Vision Tech for services rendered. It's a classic value extraction strategy. The clinical term for what was essentially theft made me feel strangely detached, as though we were discussing a case study rather than my life. But beneath that professional veneer, a slow-burning anger was building. So that's what this has all been about, I said quietly. Not just the affair, not just the money. He's been systematically ensuring that even with my majority stake in TechVault, he would still control the real value through this shadow company. And Vanessa Miller might not even know the full extent of it, Rebecca mused. Based on her reaction, today, she believed his story about the money coming from his private investments. She may think she's a true partner in Vision Tech, not realizing she's just another pawn. I thought back to Vanessa's face in the restaurant, the genuine shock and dismay when she'd learned about the money, the way Daniel had cut her off when she'd started asking questions. Perhaps she wasn't the calculating homewrecker I'd imagined, but someone else caught in Daniel's web of manipulation. We need to move quickly, Rebecca said, setting down her coffee. This changes our approach significantly. How so? I asked. Daniel's not just taken your joint savings. He's actively attempting to undermine TechVault's value structure. As majority shareholder, you have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company's interests. She turned to Michael. We need a complete forensic analysis of both companies. Bank records, contracts, communications, anything that establishes the connection. Michael was already typing. I'll have to call in some favors, but I can get started. Immediately. And I need to pick up Aiden from his friend's house, I said, suddenly remembering my son with a pang of guilt. In the whirlwind of the morning's revelations, I'd pushed thoughts of him aside. He needs to know something's wrong, even if I don't tell him everything yet. Rebecca squeezed my arm gently. That's wise. Children sense tension even when we try to shield them. Better a simplified truth than an elaborate fiction. As I rose to leave, my phone chimed with an incoming message. Daniel, we need to talk. Alone, no lawyers, no brother, no drama, just you and me. I can explain everything. Meet me at Riverside Park at 3. I'll have the money. I showed the message to Rebecca and Michael, who exchanged skeptical glances. It's a manipulation tactic, Rebecca said immediately. He wants to get you alone, away from your support system, where he can employ the emotional leverage he's refined over 8 years of marriage. But if he really does have the money? I began. If he has the money, he can wire it to the account he took it from. Michael countered firmly. No need for a secluded meeting in the park. They were right, of course. The Daniel I'd believed in, trusted, loved, no longer existed. Perhaps he never had. In his place was a stranger who had carefully calculated every move, every lie, every manipulation to get what he wanted at my expense. I'm not going, I decided, silencing the phone. If he wants to return the money, he knows how to do it. No meetings, no explanations, no second chances. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign yet liberating. For years I had been the understanding one, the forgiving one, the one who listened to explanations and gave second chances. But that version of me had vanished somewhere between the 3:17 a.m. bank alert and the discovery of Daniel's elaborate betrayal. In her place stood someone new, someone who was still taking shape, still discovering her own boundaries and power. Someone who would protect what mattered. Aiden, my financial security, my dignity. Someone Daniel had never expected me to become. Aiden's laughter drifted from the backyard, where he was kicking a soccer ball with Michael's son, Jake. The sight of him, so innocent, so unaware of how dramatically his life was about to change, made my heart constrict painfully in my chest. How do I tell him? I asked, watching through the kitchen window as the boys executed an elaborate victory dance after a successful goal. How do I explain that his father— I couldn't finish the sentence. The words stuck in my throat, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to voice aloud. You don't have to tell him everything at once, Michael said gently, standing beside me. Kids are resilient, Ellie. More than we give them credit for. Rebecca nodded from her position at the dining table, where she'd spent the last hour making calls and drafting documents. The important thing is to be honest without burdening him with adult problems. He needs to know his world is changing, but also that he's still secure within it. Easier said than done, I thought, watching my 7-year-old son, with Daniel's eyes and my stubborn chin, playing as though the foundations of his life weren't crumbling beneath him. As I struggled to find the right approach, my mind drifted back to the beginning, to how Daniel and I had started, and how we'd ended up here. Perhaps understanding the full context would help me explain it, not just to Aiden, but to myself. Daniel and I had met in my final year of nursing school when he came into the emergency room where I was doing my clinical rotation. He'd been coding for a hackathon for 36 hours straight and had collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. I was the nursing student assigned to monitor him after the doctor ordered IV fluids and mandatory rest. You have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen, he'd said groggily as the fluids began to restore him. Like the ocean at dawn. I'd rolled those apparently remarkable eyes, accustomed to patients' medication-induced compliments. You should see them when I've had more than 2 hours of sleep. Instead of being deterred, he'd grinned. That lopsided, slightly mischievous smile that would eventually wear down my professional boundaries. I'd like that very much. He'd asked for my number before being discharged. I'd declined, citing ethical guidelines about provider-patient relationships. He'd nodded, apparently accepting my refusal with good grace. The next day, he'd returned to the ER waiting room with coffee. Not as a patient this time, so those ethical guidelines don't apply anymore, right? His persistence had been charming rather than creepy, his intelligence evident in the way he'd found a legitimate workaround to my objection. I'd accepted the coffee, and 2 years later, I'd accepted his proposal beneath the twinkling lights of New York City's Christmas decorations. We'd been happy, genuinely happy, for most of our marriage. Daniel's first startup had failed spectacularly, burning through his savings and a small investment from his parents. His second had been acquired for just enough to pay off the debts from the first. Tech Vault was his third attempt, and from the beginning, it had shown more promise than the others. The idea had come to him after a major cloud security breach made headlines. He'd spent weeks researching existing security protocols, identifying vulnerabilities that no one else seemed to be addressing. His excitement had been contagious as he'd explained his vision for a more robust, adaptive security system. This is it, Ellie, he'd said, his eyes bright with conviction. This is the one that changes everything. I'd believed him. More than that, I'd believed in him. When he'd asked for my inheritance, $150,000 from my grandmother, money I'd been saving, for a down payment on our dream home, I'd hesitated only briefly. What if it fails, like the others? I'd asked. It won't, he'd promised. But if you're concerned, we can structure it so you have controlling interest. 51% ownership. It's just a formality. The company will be ours, just like everything else in our lives. That promise of shared dreams, shared risks, shared rewards had convinced me. I'd agreed, and we'd signed the paperwork making me the majority shareholder, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. After all, we were partners in everything. The legal structure was just that. A structure, not a reflection of our marriage. For the first year, TechVault had struggled like any new startup. Daniel worked endless hours, coming home exhausted but excited about small victories, a successful demo, a positive meeting with a potential client, incremental improvements to the security protocols. I'd supported him in every way I could, taking extra shifts at the hospital to ensure our household expenses were covered, listening to his technical challenges even when I understood only half of what he was saying, believing wholeheartedly in his vision. Then came Aiden's birth, unexpected but welcome, a tiny miracle who'd transformed our lives in ways we'd never anticipated. Daniel had been ecstatic, holding our son with a blend of terror and wonder that had made me fall in love with him all over again. "I'll make sure he has everything," Daniel had whispered, stroking Aiden's impossibly small fingers. Everything we didn't have growing up: security, opportunities, a legacy. For a while, he'd been the father I'd always believed he would be, present despite his work demands, engaged with every milestone, determined to balance his entrepreneurial ambitions with his family responsibilities. The change had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. More late nights at the office, more weekend emergencies that required his immediate attention. More distraction when he was physically present, his mind clearly elsewhere even as he went through the motions of family life. I'd attributed it to TechVault's growing success. The company had secured its first major client, then another, then another. Daniel had hired a small team, moved from our spare bedroom to a real office downtown, begun to attract attention from industry insiders who recognized the potential of his security protocols. "It's just temporary," he'd assured me when I'd expressed concern about his absences. "Once we secure the Series A funding, things will settle down. I'll be able to delegate more, be home more." I'd believed him because I'd wanted to believe him. Because the alternative, that success was changing him, drawing him away from us, was too painful to contemplate. Then came the business trips that seemed to multiply on his calendar. The conferences and client meetings that required his presence, but somehow never mine, despite my official role as majority shareholder. The growing distance between us, not just physically but emotionally, as though he was gradually inhabiting a world I had no place in. "You wouldn't enjoy it," he'd say, when I suggested accompanying him to a tech conference or an investor dinner. "It's all shop talk and networking. Besides, Aiden needs you here." Again, I'd accepted his explanations because they'd seemed reasonable on the surface. I was busy with my nursing career, with raising Aiden, with maintaining our home and relationships. The business side had always been Daniel's domain, his passion. It made sense for him to handle it alone. Looking back now, I could see how skillfully he'd compartmentalized his life. How he'd gradually excluded me from TechVault's operations while maintaining the illusion that we were still partners in everything that mattered. How he'd used my trust as a shield for his deception, and Vanessa Miller had been the culmination of that deception, not the beginning of it. She'd appeared in our lives 4 months ago, when Daniel had announced that TechVault was hiring a marketing director to prepare for expansion. "She comes highly recommended," he'd said casually over dinner. "MBA from Wharton, experience with 3 successful tech launches. She really gets our vision." I'd nodded, asked appropriate questions, expressed enthusiasm for this new phase of TechVault's growth. I'd even suggested having her over for dinner to welcome her to the team, an idea Daniel had deflected with vague assertions about professionalism and boundaries. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, I could see what should have been obvious. The late nights that had become later, the weekend work sessions that had extended from morning to night, the business trips that had grown more frequent, often to destinations where industry conferences might provide convenient cover for other activities. The signs had all been there, hidden in plain sight. I simply hadn't wanted to see them. "Ellie?" Michael's voice pulled me back to the present. Are you okay? You went somewhere else for a minute. I realized I'd been staring out the window, lost in memories, for several minutes. Aiden and Jake were still playing, oblivious to the adult complexities unfolding inside. I was just thinking about how we got here, I said softly. About all the warning signs I missed, or chose to ignore. Rebecca joined us at the window, her expression sympathetic but firm. That's a common reaction to betrayal. Looking back for clues, wondering what you could have done differently. But Ellie, this isn't your fault. Daniel made these choices. He created this elaborate deception. He betrayed not just your marriage, but your financial partnership and your trust as a co-founder. I know that intellectually, I admitted. But emotionally, it's going to take time, Michael finished for me. You can't unravel 8 years of marriage in a single morning. He was right, of course. Understanding the full context of Daniel's betrayal, how it had evolved from small deceptions to this elaborate scheme, didn't lessen the pain, but it did help me see more clearly what needed to be done. I turned from the window, from the sight of my son still innocent and unaware, and faced Rebecca and Michael with newfound resolve. Let's protect what matters, I said. Aiden's future, my financial security, and yes, Tech Vault itself, not for Daniel's sake, but because it represents years of work by people who don't deserve to lose their livelihoods because of his actions. As I spoke, I felt something shift inside me. A strengthening of purpose, a clarification of priorities. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And I intended to ensure it was a future where Daniel's betrayal wouldn't define us. First, I said, I need to talk to my son. Mom, are we going home soon? Aiden asked, his small hand warm in mine as we walked along the path in Michael's backyard garden. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn, highlighting the smudges of dirt on my son's knees from his soccer game with his cousin. I guided him to the wooden bench beneath the old maple tree, our special spot whenever. We visited Michael, where we'd read stories and identified cloud shapes on lazy Sunday afternoons. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Aiden, I began, my voice gentler than I'd expected it to be. There's something I need to talk to you about. His eyes, so like Daniel's, widened slightly. At 7, he was perceptive enough to recognize the weight in my tone, the seriousness that belied my attempt at casualness. Is it about Dad? He asked, surprising me with his intuition. Is that why he didn't come home last night? The directness of his question momentarily stole my breath. I'd been so consumed with the financial betrayal, with Daniel's deception and Vanessa's role in it, that I hadn't fully processed how Aiden had been experiencing his father's growing absences. Yes, sweetheart, it is about Dad, I said, choosing honesty over protection. Dad and I are having some grown-up problems right now. We're going to be staying with Uncle Michael for a few days while we figure things out. Aiden's brow furrowed, his small face suddenly serious beyond his years. Are you and Dad getting a divorce, like Zach's parents? My heart constricted at the matter-of-fact way he asked the question, as though he'd been considering this possibility for some time. Zach was his classmate, a child who'd weathered his parents' acrimonious divorce the previous year with visible distress. I wanted to shield him, to offer reassurances that everything would be fine. But I remembered the hollow promises I'd accepted from Daniel, how they'd ultimately made the truth more painful when it finally emerged. I wouldn't do that to my son. Don't know yet, Aiden, I said truthfully. But I do know that whatever happens between Dad and me, we both love you very much. That will never change. He nodded slowly, processing this in the methodical way that reminded me so much of myself. Did Dad do something bad? He asked after a moment of contemplation. Again, the urge to protect him warred with my commitment to honesty. Dad made some choices that hurt our family, I said carefully. Grown-up choices about money and trust that have made it hard for us to be together right now. Is he going to jail? Aiden's voice rose slightly, fear creeping in for the first time. "No, sweetie," I assured him quickly. "It's not that kind of bad choice. It's more about breaking promises between Dad and me." Aiden was quiet for a long moment, his small fingers picking at a loose thread on his shirt. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable. "Is it my fault? Because I broke my tablet last month and you guys had that fight about buying a new one?" The innocent question struck me like a physical blow. Children so often internalized their parents' conflicts, finding ways to blame themselves for adult problems that had nothing to do with them. "Aiden, look at me," I said, turning his face gently toward mine. "None of this is your fault. Not one single bit. This is about choices that Dad and I made as adults. You are the best thing in both our lives, and nothing will ever change that." He studied my face, searching for truth in the way children do, with unflinching directness. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once, decisively. "Okay, but I still get to see Dad, right?" "Of course," I said, though uncertainty fluttered in my chest. How would custody work? How would co-parenting function after such a profound betrayal? Questions for another day. "Dad loves you, and you'll definitely still see him." Aiden leaned against me, his small body warm against my side. "I'm sad," he said simply, "but I'm okay if you're okay, Mom." The uncomplicated compassion in his statement brought tears to my eyes. My 7-year-old son, concerned for my well-being even as his own world shifted beneath him. I hugged him tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of his shampoo and the lingering outdoorsy smell of his play with Jake. "We're going to be okay," I promised, and for the first time since the 3:17 a.m. bank notification, I truly believed it. Not because I knew what the future held, but because I knew who would be facing it with me. This remarkable, resilient little person who somehow understood that we would navigate this storm together. As Aiden ran back to Jake, eager to resume their game now that our serious conversation had concluded, I remained on the bench watching him go. Something fundamental had shifted inside me during our conversation. A crystallization of purpose, a clarification of priorities. For weeks I had been trying to understand what had gone wrong in my marriage, what signs I had missed, what I could have done differently. I'd been looking backward, seeking explanations for Daniel's betrayal in our shared history. But sitting there, watching my son's resilience in action, I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions. The past couldn't be changed. Daniel's choices were his own, motivated by factors I might never fully understand. What mattered now wasn't why it had happened, but what I would do next, and what I would do next needed to be guided by one principle: creating the most stable, secure future possible for Aiden and myself. That meant no rash decisions driven by hurt or revenge, no sacrificing long-term security for short-term satisfaction, no destroying what could be salvaged simply because parts were irreparably broken. I pulled out my phone, ignoring the 7 missed calls from Daniel, and opened my calendar app. There, neatly scheduled for the following morning, was a reminder. Tech Vault Board Meeting, Quarterly Update. The quarterly board meeting that Daniel had tried to persuade me to skip, citing my busy schedule at the hospital and the routine nature of the updates. The meeting I'd agreed to miss because I trusted him to represent our shared interests. "Not this time," I murmured, pressing the attending button. I returned to the house, finding Rebecca and Michael deep in conversation at the dining table, surrounded by papers and open laptops. "I've made a decision," I announced, my voice steadier than it had been all day. "I'm attending tomorrow's Tech Vault board meeting." They looked up, surprise evident on both their faces. "That's unexpected," Rebecca said carefully. "Are you sure that's the best approach? It might be more strategic to call an emergency meeting after we've gathered more evidence." I shook my head. The quarterly meeting is already on the books. All the board members will be there, including Trevor Barnes with his 5%. So will the key investors. It's the perfect opportunity to address what's happened without appearing reactionary. Michael looked skeptical. Daniel will be prepared. To control the narrative? He's had months to lay groundwork for whatever he's planning. Yes, he has, I agreed. But he's been preparing to manage the Eleanor Mercer he's known for 8 years. The supportive wife who trusted him implicitly, who lacked confidence in business settings, who deferred to his expertise in all things tech vault. I straightened my shoulders. That woman no longer exists. Something in my tone must have conveyed my newfound resolve, because Rebecca's expression shifted from concern to consideration. It could work, she said thoughtfully, especially if we spend tonight preparing thoroughly. The element of surprise is powerful. Daniel won't expect you to show up, let alone to challenge him. We'll need to be strategic, Michael cautioned. If Daniel hasn't returned the money by the 5 o'clock deadline, we should be prepared to present evidence of the financial misappropriation. But we should also have a clear proposal for moving forward, one that protects Tech Vault's stability while securing your interests. I agree, I said, joining them at the table. This isn't about destroying Daniel or Tech Vault. It's about protecting what's mine, my investment, my son's future, and yes, the company itself. As we bent over the documents, formulating strategies, and contingency plans, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The tears and shock of the morning seemed to belong to another person, another life. The path ahead was still uncertain, fraught with challenges I couldn't yet anticipate, but my direction was clear. Daniel had underestimated me in the most fundamental way possible. He had mistaken my trust for weakness, my support for dependency, my patience for passivity. He had calculated that I would either crumble under the betrayal or lash out ineffectively, allowing him to manage the fallout on his terms. He hadn't accounted for this third option, this transformation from shocked victim to strategic adversary. He hadn't imagined that in destroying our marriage, he might create something he couldn't control. A woman who understood exactly what she had to lose and exactly what she needed to do to protect it. My phone chimed with a text message. Daniel. Again. 5 p.m. deadline approaching. We need to talk. Last chance, Ellie. I set the phone aside without responding. The Eleanor who would have been swayed by that veiled threat, who would have given him one more chance to explain, who would have prioritized peace over justice, she was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Someone who saw clearly now what she had been blind to before. Someone who understood that true strength wasn't found in forgiveness without accountability, or in compromise without consequence. As 5 o'clock came and went with no transfer of funds, no real attempt at restitution, I made a final decision, one that would alter the course of all our lives. Rebecca, I said quietly, prepare the documents for tomorrow, all of them, including the motion to remove Daniel Mercer as CEO of Tech Vault, effective immediately. The die was cast. By this time tomorrow, nothing would be the same. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was ready. Dawn broke with startling clarity, sunlight streaming through Michael's guest room window as I finished buttoning my navy blue blazer. I'd slept surprisingly well, perhaps 4 hours in total, but they had been deep and dreamless, my mind seemingly grateful for the respite after yesterday's emotional marathon. The woman who stared back at me from the mirror looked composed, professional. The tailored pantsuit, purchased for hospital board meetings I occasionally attended as the representative for surgical nursing, conveyed authority without ostentation. Pearl earrings, a gift from my mother when I graduated nursing school, added a touch of elegance that felt like armor. This wasn't the Daniel's wife version of Eleanor Mercer. This was board member Mercer, majority shareholder Mercer, mother protecting her son's future Mercer. A soft knock at the door interrupted my assessment. Coffee, Michael said, entering with a steaming mug. Strong enough to strip paint. I accepted it gratefully. Thank you. For the coffee, for the guest room, for everything. You'd do the same for me. He leaned against the doorframe, studying me with a brother's assessing gaze. How are you feeling? Surprisingly steady, I admitted, taking a sip of the scalding liquid. Almost peaceful. That's what happens when you make a decision that aligns with your deepest values. The noise stops. He smiled slightly. You look ready to conquer Wall Street. Just one tech startup, I corrected, though his words bolstered my confidence. One step at a time. We made our way downstairs where Rebecca was already at the dining table, arrayed with legal documents in precise stacks. She looked up as we entered, her expression shifting from concentration to approval. Perfect outfit choice, she said. Professional, confident, not trying too hard. The visual matters. It sets the tone before you say a word. I set down my coffee and picked up the topmost document from the nearest stack. A comprehensive analysis of TechVault's financial position, prepared by Michael late into the night. Any word from Daniel? Rebecca asked, though she clearly knew the answer. Nothing since his last chance text yesterday, I replied. The money hasn't been returned. The three of us had stayed up until after midnight, preparing for today's board meeting. Michael had tracked the money trail, confirming that the entire $287,000 had indeed been transferred to Vision Tech's business account and subsequently dispersed in a series of strategic expenditures. $120,000 for office lease and renovations, $75,000 for equipment and technology, $42,000 for initial staffing contracts, and $50,000 held in reserve, all authorized by Daniel, all executed within 72 hours of the transfer, all suspiciously neat and rounded numbers that suggested these weren't genuine market rate transactions but rather predetermined allocations. He's moved quickly, Michael had observed. Too quickly for these to be legitimate business expenses. My guess is he's funneled the money through shell companies or friendly vendors who will kick back portions of it later. Now, as morning light illuminated the documents before us, the full scope of Daniel's betrayal seemed even more calculated than I'd initially realized. This wasn't just about an affair, or even about the stolen money. This was about a husband systematically dismantling the financial foundation of his family's future, while creating a shadow structure that would benefit only himself. We've got everything we need, Rebecca assured me, sensing my momentary hesitation. Financial records, corporate bylaws, evidence of fiduciary breach. Daniel doesn't know what's coming. Neither do I, entirely, I admitted. He'll fight back. He's always been good at thinking on his feet. That's why we've prepared for multiple scenarios, she reminded me, tapping a color-coded folder. A through E, depending on how he responds. The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs announced Aiden's awakening. He burst into the kitchen, already dressed in the clothes I'd laid out for him the night before, his cowlick stubbornly defying the wet comb attempt he'd clearly made. Morning, Mom. Uncle Mike said I can go to his office today and help organize the filing system. He said I'm very methodical. I caught Michael's eye over Aiden's head, grateful for his foresight in arranging a distraction for my son. That sounds perfect, buddy. Remember to thank Uncle Mike for letting you help. I will. He hugged me impulsively, his small arms tight around my waist. Good luck with your big work meeting. Dad texted me this morning and said to tell you he loves us both and everything will be okay. My stomach clenched. Daniel had contacted Aiden directly? I kept my expression neutral despite the surge of anger. Oh? When did Dad text you? Really early. I was already awake because Jake snores. He pulled back, looking up at me earnestly. Is it okay that I texted him back? I just said I love him too. Of course it's okay, I assured him, smoothing down his unruly hair. You can always tell Dad, you love him. As Aiden bounded off to find Jake, I exchanged glances with Rebecca and Michael. He's trying to establish a narrative, Rebecca said quietly. Using Aiden as a conduit to soften your position. And gathering evidence that he's being a concerned father, Michael added, in case this moves toward custody discussions. The manipulation was so transparent it should have angered me. But instead, it clarified something I'd been struggling to articulate. Looking at the documents spread before us, the evidence of financial misconduct, the legal strategies for corporate restructuring, the divorce considerations, I suddenly understood what had been bothering me about our approach. We're reacting, I said slowly. Everything we've prepared is a response to what Daniel has already done. We're playing defense. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. We're building a case based on his misconduct. That's how the legal system works. I know, but I searched for the words to express the shift occurring within me. What if instead of just responding to Daniel's actions, we articulate a vision for what comes next? Not just removing him as CEO, but reshaping TechVault into something stronger? Michael leaned forward, intrigued. What are you thinking? I pulled a blank sheet of paper toward me, uncapping a pen. TechVault has a solid technical foundation. Daniel's security protocols are genuinely innovative. That's why the investors came on board. But the company has always lacked strategic direction in other areas. As I spoke, I began to sketch an organizational chart, drawing on knowledge I'd absorbed during those boring conversations I'd overheard between Daniel and his team, the investor decks I'd helped him practice presenting, the market analyses I'd proofread late at night. The current structure is too Daniel-centric, I continued, circling the CEO position at the top of the hierarchy. Everything flows through him, which creates a critical vulnerability. If we distribute leadership across a more balanced executive team, CTO, COO, CFO, we remove that single point of failure. Rebecca studied the emerging diagram with growing interest. You're not just planning to remove Daniel. You're planning to restructure the entire company. Exactly. The vision was crystallizing as I spoke, pieces falling into place with surprising clarity. Daniel's technical expertise is valuable, but his leadership approach is fundamentally flawed. TechVault doesn't need a visionary who circumvents governance protocols. It needs a solid executive structure that can scale responsibly. Michael whistled softly. This is comprehensive. Where did all this come from? I smiled slightly. 8 years of listening, of watching, of absorbing information even when Daniel thought I wasn't paying attention. I tapped the paper. I may not have been actively involved in TechVault's operations, but that doesn't mean I wasn't learning about them. Rebecca's expression shifted from surprise to approval. This changes our approach significantly. Instead of just presenting evidence of Daniel's misconduct, we're offering the board a forward-looking solution, a path that protects their investment while addressing the governance issues. It's not about punishing Daniel, I said, the realization solidifying as I articulated it. It's about salvaging what's valuable at TechVault while excising what's toxic. It's about building something sustainable from what remains. As I finished outlining my vision for TechVault's restructuring, a strange sense of purpose settled over me. For years, I had defined myself primarily as Daniel's wife, Aiden's mother, a dedicated but ultimately secondary character in the narrative of our family life. My nursing career, while important to me, had always taken a back seat to Daniel's entrepreneurial ambitions, not because he had demanded it, but because I had accepted that prioritization as natural, as necessary. Now, confronted with the collapse of that carefully constructed identity, I was discovering something unexpected, a capacity for strategic thinking I hadn't fully acknowledged, a clarity of purpose that transcended my relationship with Daniel, a strength that had always been present but never fully expressed. This is what we lead with, I decided, setting down the pen. Not just the evidence of misconduct, but the vision for recovery and growth. We give the board and investors a choice. Continue with a CEO who has demonstrated financial impropriety and questionable judgment, or embrace a new direction that preserves what works while addressing what doesn't? Rebecca nodded slowly, a new respect evident in her expression. It's bold, unexpected, and potentially very effective. She glanced at her watch. We should leave soon. The meeting starts at 9. As I gathered the documents, organizing them according to our revised strategy, my phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel again. Ellie, this has gone far enough. I'm sorry about the money. I made a mistake. But if you attend today's board meeting and try to undermine me, you'll destroy everything we've built. Think about Aiden. Think about our future. I'll make this right. I promise. The familiar phrases, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I promise. Words that had once held such power over me now felt hollow, manipulative. The reference to Aiden was particularly transparent, a calculated attempt to use my love for our son as leverage. I showed the message to Rebecca and Michael, who exchanged knowing glances. He's worried, Michael observed. He must have heard somehow that you're attending the meeting. Probably from Trevor, Rebecca suggested. Board members, talk. I slipped the phone into my bag without responding, a deliberate choice that felt significant. The old Eleanor would have engaged, would have explained, would have sought middle ground even when none existed. The woman I was becoming understood the power of silence, of action over words. I'm ready, I said, straightening my shoulders. As we headed for the door, Aiden ran to hug me goodbye, his small arms fierce in their conviction. You're gonna be awesome, Mom, he whispered. You're the strongest person I know. His simple faith steadied me, reminding me of what truly mattered in this complex situation. Not revenge against Daniel, not even the reclamation of our stolen savings, but the creation of a secure, stable future for this remarkable child, and the modeling of integrity and resilience he would carry with him long after today's crisis had passed. I love you, buddy, I told him, kissing the top of his head. More than anything in the world. With those words echoing in my heart, I walked out into the morning sunshine, ready to reclaim not just what Daniel had taken, but what I had willingly surrendered long before. My voice, my vision, my value beyond the roles of wife and mother. Today wasn't just about confronting Daniel's betrayal. It was about declaring my purpose, as a businesswoman, as a mother, as a woman who would no longer allow others to define her worth or limit her potential. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened in the boardroom, today I had already won the most important battle, the one for my own future. TechVault's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the city's emerging tech district. The industrial chic exterior, exposed brick, steel beams, and oversized windows belied the cutting-edge security systems housed within. I'd visited only a handful of times since the company had moved from our spare bedroom to this impressive space, always as Daniel's wife, rather than as the majority shareholder. Today would be different. As Rebecca and I approached the entrance, I felt a curious blend of nerves and determination. This building represented years of Daniel's work, yes, but also my investment, my support, and ultimately, my legal ownership. Remember, Rebecca murmured as we stepped into the lobby, you belong here more than anyone. Act like it. The receptionist looked up, recognition flickering across her face. Mrs. Mercer, we weren't expecting you today. It's Ms. Mercer, actually, I corrected gently. I'm here for the board meeting. Eleanor Mercer, majority shareholder. The slight emphasis on my title felt foreign on my tongue, but necessary, establishing from the outset that I was present in my official capacity, not as an extension of Daniel. Of course, Ms. Mercer. The meeting is in the main conference room on the 3rd floor. Mr. Mercer hasn't arrived yet, but Mr. Barnes is already here. Trevor Barnes, Daniel's college roommate, TechVault's nominal chief technology officer, and 5% equity holder. I'd met him a dozen times at company functions and family barbecues, had listened to Daniel describe him as brilliant but disorganized, a technical genius who needed Daniel's vision and leadership to function effectively. "Thank you," I said, accepting the visitor badges the receptionist hastily produced for Rebecca and me. "We know the way." In the elevator, Rebecca gave my arm a reassuring squeeze. First hurdle cleared. The receptionist will undoubtedly alert Daniel that you're here, which means he'll be scrambling to adjust his strategy. I nodded, mentally reviewing our plan. We had decided on a three-pronged approach. First, present the evidence of financial misconduct clearly and dispassionately, focusing on the facts rather than emotional impact. Second, introduce my vision for TechVault's restructuring, not as a punitive measure against Daniel, but as a necessary evolution for the company's long-term stability. Third, propose a separation of personal and professional matters, a fair divorce, settlement in exchange for Daniel's cooperation with the corporate transition. It was a strategy that prioritized resolution over retribution, stability over scorched earth. A path that would protect Aiden's future and secure my financial position without unnecessarily destroying what Daniel had built. Assuming, of course, that Daniel would behave rationally, a substantial assumption given recent events. The elevator. Doors opened onto TechVault's main floor, a bustling open workspace where engineers and developers clustered around standing desks and collaborative stations. Several heads turned as Rebecca and I stepped out, whispers following in our wake. Clearly, news of my arrival was already circulating. A young woman in dark-rimmed glasses approached, her expression somewhere between nervous and respectful. "Ms. Mercer, I'm Zoe Chen, head of product development. Can I show you to the conference room?" "Thank you, Zoe. That would be helpful." As we followed her through the workspace, I noted details I'd missed during my infrequent visits. The equal gender balance among the technical staff, unusual in the male-dominated tech industry, the vibrant collaboration spaces interspersed with private focus booths, the general atmosphere of engaged innovation rather than frantic hustle. Whatever Daniel's personal failings, he had built a workplace culture that appeared genuinely positive. Something worth preserving, perhaps, even as its leadership structure changed. The conference room door stood ajar, voices drifting out, one unmistakably Trevor's, with its distinctive nervous energy. Can't just show up without warning. There's protocol, a structure to these things. "She's the majority shareholder, Trevor." This voice belonged to Elizabeth Winters, I realized, the lead investor from Vertex Capital who had spearheaded TechVault's Series A funding. "She doesn't need an invitation to attend a board meeting." Zoe knocked lightly on the doorframe, then stepped aside to announce us. "Ms. Mercer and her attorney have arrived." All conversation ceased as Rebecca and I entered the room. Trevor. Barnes sat halfway down the long conference table, his perpetually rumpled appearance accentuated by what appeared to be a hastily donned sport coat over a faded tech conference t-shirt. Across from him, Elizabeth Winters, elegant, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, assessed us with undisguised interest. "Eleanor," she said, rising to extend her hand. "What an unexpected pleasure. I've been hoping to meet the woman behind TechVault's initial funding for quite some time." Her emphasis on my financial role was subtle but significant, acknowledging my position as more than just Daniel's wife, in a way Daniel had rarely done himself. "The pleasure is mine, Elizabeth," I replied, matching her firm handshake. "Though, I wish it were under different circumstances." Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Eleanor, this is highly unusual. Daniel handles these meetings as we agreed when the company was formed. That arrangement was informal, not legally binding," Rebecca interjected smoothly, setting her briefcase on the table. "As majority shareholder, Ms. Mercer has not only the right, but the responsibility to participate in governance matters." Trevor's eyes darted between us, his expression troubled. Daniel's on his way. He said we should wait before discussing anything substantive. I imagine he did, I said mildly, taking a seat at the head of the table. Daniel's usual position, I noted from the abandoned coffee mug bearing his name. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. Rebecca sat beside me, arranging our materials with practiced efficiency. Elizabeth Winters returned to her seat, watching the proceedings with the keen interest of someone recognizing the opening moves of a significant game. While we wait for Daniel, I said, perhaps you could bring me up to speed on the company's current status, Trevor. I understand from the pre-meeting materials that the Series A funding has been fully secured. Trevor blinked, clearly caught off guard by my knowledge of the financial details. Yes, we closed the round last month. $12 million, with Vertex as the lead. He glanced at Elizabeth, who nodded in confirmation. We're using the capital to expand the development team and accelerate our enterprise security product launch. And the partnership with Vision Tech Marketing? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. That wasn't mentioned in the materials. Trevor's face flushed. That's, a recent development. Daniel can explain better when he arrives. I'm sure he can. I agreed. But as I understand it, a significant sum has already been allocated to this partnership. Specifically, $287,000 transferred to Vision Tech's accounts 3 days ago. The room fell silent. Elizabeth Winters leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharpening. I wasn't aware of any such expenditure. That exceeds Daniel's discretionary spending authority as outlined in our investment agreement. Before Trevor could respond, the conference room door burst open. Daniel stood in the threshold, his usual polished appearance notably absent. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his expression a volatile mixture of anger and apprehension. Ellie, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. What are you doing here? I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be diminished by his obvious attempt at intimidation. Attending a board meeting, Daniel, as is my right as majority shareholder. Need to talk privately, he insisted. This isn't the venue for... For what? I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. For discussing the unauthorized transfer of $287,000 from our joint savings account to fund Vision Tech Marketing? Or for addressing the fact that you personally control 80% of this supposed partner company? Elizabeth Winters' eyebrows shot up. Trevor slumped in his chair, shooting Daniel a look that screamed, I told you this was a bad idea. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're misrepresenting the situation completely. The transfer was a temporary measure to secure a critical service provider. A service provider that you secretly own and control, Rebecca interjected, sliding copies of Vision Tech's corporate registration documents across the table. A clear conflict of interest that you failed to disclose to your board or investors. Daniel's eyes darted around the table, assessing the shifting dynamics. Whatever strategy he had planned, perhaps counting on my absence, on Trevor's support, on his ability to control the narrative, was rapidly unraveling. In that moment, watching him recalibrate, I recognized something I had missed throughout our marriage. Daniel's fundamental belief that he was the smartest person in any room, capable of maneuvering around rules and expectations that constrained others. It wasn't malicious, exactly, but it was profoundly arrogant and ultimately destructive. I can explain everything, he said, moving to take a seat opposite me. But first, I think we should ask non-board members to step out. He glanced pointedly at Rebecca. Ms. Caldwell stays, I said firmly, as my legal representative, and I believe we should invite Jacob Morris to join us as well. Jacob Morris, TechVault's CFO, a quiet, methodical man who had always seemed slightly overshadowed by Daniel's more dynamic presence. Daniel's expression darkened. Jacob's not necessary for this discussion. On the contrary, I replied. As the financial officer responsible for regulatory compliance, his presence is essential. I turned to Trevor. Would you ask him to join us, please? Trevor hesitated, glancing at Daniel, then at me. Something in my steady gaze must have convinced him, because he nodded and rose to fetch Jacob. As we waited, Daniel leaned across the table, lowering his voice. "Ellie, think about what you're doing. If you pursue this, if you make these accusations publicly, you'll destroy everything. The company, our reputation, Aiden's security, all of it." It was his final attempt at emotional manipulation, invoking our son, implying that my actions, not his, would be responsible for any negative consequences. 6 months ago, it might have worked. Even yesterday, it might have given me pause. Today, it simply confirmed that I was on the right path. "I'm not here to destroy anything, Daniel," I said quietly. "I'm here to salvage what can be saved. The question is whether you're willing to be part of that solution, or determined to remain part of the problem." The door opened, admitting Trevor, and Jacob Morris, the latter's expression cautiously neutral as he assessed the tension in the room. "Thank you for joining us, Jacob," I said, gesturing to an empty chair. "We were just about to discuss some concerning financial transactions between TechVault and Vision Tech Marketing. I believe your insights will be valuable." As Jacob took his seat, I opened the folder Rebecca had prepared, revealing the evidence of Daniel's elaborate deception. It was time to move from strategy to action, to transform betrayal into breakthrough, loss into leverage. Daniel had emptied our account for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten who really owned his startup. Now, he was about to discover exactly what that oversight would cost him. Jacob Morris adjusted his glasses, studying the documents I'd placed before him with the focused intensity of someone who lived and breathed financial details. The conference room had fallen into a tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional flipping of pages and Daniel's increasingly agitated finger-tapping on the polished table. "These transactions," Jacob said finally, looking up from the papers, "did not go through TechVault's accounts. I would have flagged them immediately as non-compliant with our financial governance policies." "Because they were personal funds," Daniel interjected. "Not company money." Jacob's expression remained carefully neutral. "That distinction becomes problematic when the funds are used to establish a business relationship with TechVault, Mr. or Sir Mercer, especially given your controlling interest in both entities." Elizabeth Winters leaned forward, the veteran investor's expression sharpening. "Let me be clear about what I'm seeing here. Daniel, you established a separate company, Vision Tech, using personal funds, specifically funds from a joint account shared with your wife. You then positioned this company as TechVault's exclusive marketing partner without disclosing your ownership stake to the board or investors. Is that an accurate summary?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's a simplified version that ignores the strategic benefits to TechVault. Vanessa Miller is one of the top marketing talents in the industry. Her expertise will be transformative for our market position." "Vanessa Miller," I said quietly, "who also happens to be your girlfriend." The words hung in the air, making real the personal betrayal that underpinned the financial one. Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly. Elizabeth's expression remained impassive, though something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a familiar pattern she'd seen play out in other startups. "My personal life is irrelevant to this discussion," Daniel snapped. "It becomes relevant," Rebecca countered smoothly. "When personal relationships influence business decisions that affect shareholder value, particularly when those decisions involve significant financial maneuvers executed without proper disclosure or approval." Elizabeth nodded, turning to me. "Eleanor, what outcome are you seeking here? As majority shareholder, you have considerable authority to direct this situation." It was the opening I'd been waiting for, an invitation to present not just the problem but the solution. I pulled out the organizational chart I'd drafted that morning, sliding copies to each person at the me table. "TechVault has tremendous potential," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The core security technology is innovative and necessary in today's market, but the company's governance structure needs significant improvement to ensure its long-term stability and success. I outlined my vision for restructuring: a balanced executive team with appropriate checks and balances, clear financial oversight protocols, and a board expanded to include independent directors with relevant industry expertise. "And Daniel's role in this restructured organization?" Elizabeth asked, studying the chart with evident interest. "That depends on Daniel," I replied, meeting his gaze directly across the table. "His technical knowledge and industry relationships remain valuable assets to TechVault. But his position as CEO requires a level of trust and financial responsibility that recent actions have compromised." Daniel's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and—" "She can, actually," Jacob interrupted, surprising everyone with his forthright tone. "As majority shareholder, Ms. Mercer has the authority to call for leadership changes, particularly when presented with evidence of financial impropriety." I studied Jacob with new appreciation. The quiet, methodical CFO had always seemed like a background figure in Daniel's narrative of TechVault. Now, I was seeing a different side of him, a financial professional with clear ethical boundaries and the courage to enforce them. "Jacob's right," Trevor added reluctantly, avoiding Daniel's betrayed glare. "The corporate bylaws are explicit about this. If there's evidence of financial misconduct by the CEO, the majority shareholder can initiate removal proceedings." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a coordinated attack based on a misunderstanding about personal funds. I founded this company. I built it from nothing. None of you would be here without me." "That's not entirely accurate," Elizabeth said calmly. "TechVault exists because of collaborative effort. Your technical vision. Yes, but also Eleanor's initial investment, Trevor's development expertise, Jacob's financial stewardship, my firm's capital, and the hard work of every employee in this building." Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room, a recognition of the collective enterprise that Daniel had increasingly portrayed as his singular achievement. "The question before us," she continued, "is not about past contributions, but future governance. Eleanor has presented a thoughtful restructuring plan that addresses legitimate concerns while preserving TechVault's core strengths. As an investor with fiduciary responsibilities to my limited partners, I find her approach reasonable and forward-thinking." Daniel looked around the table, clearly recognizing the shifting allegiances. Whatever support he had counted on, from Trevor's friendship, from his position as founder, from the force of his personality, was evaporating in the face of documented misconduct and a pragmatic alternative. "This isn't necessary," he said, his tone shifting from indignation to negotiation. "I acknowledge that the Vision Tech arrangement should have been handled differently. We can unwind those transactions, implement better disclosure protocols." "The issue isn't just disclosure, Daniel," I said quietly. "It's judgment. It's trustworthiness. It's the willingness to prioritize your personal desires over your fiduciary responsibilities, to the company and to our family." The personal and professional dimensions of his betrayal hung in the air between us, impossible to separate despite his attempts to compartmentalize them. He turned to Trevor, desperation edging into his voice. "Tell them about the Northwell deal, about the DoD security clearance process, about all the relationships that depend on my personal involvement. Tell them what happens to TechVault if I'm forced out." Trevor looked pained, caught between loyalty to his friend and recognition of the evidence before him. "The Northwell contract isn't finalized yet," he said carefully. "And while Daniel has been the primary contact, the technical specifications they're interested in were developed by our core engineering team, who would remain in place under Eleanor's restructuring plan." It was another pillar of support crumbling beneath Daniel's feet, the notion that he was indispensable, that TechVault couldn't function without him at the helm. Before Daniel could respond, the conference room door opened, and a familiar figure stepped hesitantly inside. Vanessa Miller, looking considerably less polished than she had at the Westlake Inn. Her eyes widened as she took in the assembled group, lingering on me with unmistakable discomfort. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice tighter than I remembered. "I was told there was an emergency board meeting about Vision Tech's contract." "Perfect timing, Ms. Miller," Rebecca said smoothly. "We were just discussing the circumstances surrounding Vision Tech's formation and its relationship with TechVault." Vanessa's gaze darted to Daniel, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. A warning not to speak freely, I realized. "Vanessa," I said, addressing her directly, "when did you first learn that the funding for Vision Tech came from Daniel's and my joint savings account?" She paled slightly. "Yesterday, at the hotel, when you confronted us." Her voice dropped. "I swear I didn't know. Daniel told me the money was from his personal investment portfolio." "And your understanding of your equity position in Vision Tech? Were you aware that Daniel structured the company to give himself 80% ownership while positioning you as CEO?" Her expression confirmed what I'd suspected. Another betrayal, another manipulation by the man who had promised her, as he had once promised me, a partnership of equals. 60-40, she said faintly. "We agreed to a 60-40 split, with me holding 40% as founder and CEO." She turned to Daniel, confusion and hurt evident in her expression. "That's what the paperwork I signed indicated." "The filed documents tell a different story," Rebecca said, passing her a copy of Vision Tech's corporate registration. "Perhaps you should review what was actually submitted to the Secretary of State." As Vanessa scanned the document, her professional composure cracked. 20%? You gave me 20%? After I left my position at Meridian to build this agency for you? Daniel's expression darkened. "This isn't the time or place, Vanessa. We'll discuss it privately." "Like we discussed the funding source?" she countered, anger replacing shock. "Like we discussed my equity stake? How many other lies are waiting to be discovered, Daniel?" The dynamic was shifting again in ways Daniel clearly hadn't anticipated. Vanessa, perhaps the only remaining ally he might have counted on, was publicly questioning his truthfulness, adding her voice to the growing chorus of doubt. I felt a surprising pang of empathy for her. Despite the pain her relationship with Daniel had caused me, it was becoming increasingly clear that she, too, had been manipulated. A pawn in Daniel's elaborate chess game rather than the scheming homewrecker I'd initially imagined. "Ms. Miller," Elizabeth said, her tone businesslike but not unkind, "your marketing expertise remains valuable to TechVault, regardless of these concerning revelations. I hope you'll consider continuing your professional relationship with the company under more transparent arrangements." It was an olive branch, unexpected but strategic, separating Vanessa's professional contributions from the morass of Daniel's deceptions. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, professionalism reasserting itself despite the emotional blow. "I'm committed to the marketing strategy I've developed. The brand positioning work we've already completed has significant potential." She glanced at me, then back to Elizabeth. "But I would need assurances about the leadership structure moving forward." "That's precisely what we're addressing today," Elizabeth replied, gesturing to the organizational chart I'd provided. "Ms. Mercer has proposed a restructuring that emphasizes balanced governance and appropriate oversight." As Vanessa took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from Daniel as possible, I realized that something remarkable was happening. A support network was forming, not through my deliberate recruitment, but through the natural alignment of people who valued integrity over charisma, transparency over maneuvering, collaboration over domination. Jacob, with his quiet insistence on financial propriety. Trevor, reluctantly acknowledging the corporate realities despite personal loyalty. Elizabeth, the seasoned investor prioritizing sustainable governance over founder worship. And now Vanessa, her professional identity asserting itself independent of her personal entanglement with Daniel. They weren't gathered in opposition to Daniel so much as in support of something larger: the potential of TechVault beyond its flawed founder, the possibility of building something stronger from the crisis he had precipitated. Daniel remained standing, his expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and calculation as he witnessed the coalition forming before him. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was discovering that his charm, his vision, his persuasive abilities had limits, that actions had consequences even for those accustomed to defining their own reality. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the tension evident in his posture. "Not by a long shot." But looking around the table at the unlikely allies who had emerged in the wake of his betrayal, I knew that it was, in fact, nearly over. Not in the way I had initially imagined, with vengeance and destruction, but with something more powerful: reconstruction, recommitment to principles larger than any individual, the possibility of something better emerging. From broken trust, the next phase would not be easy. There would be legal complexities, operational challenges, personal reckonings. But for the first time since that 3:17 a.m. bank notification had shattered my world, I felt genuinely hopeful about what came next. Daniel had emptied our account for his girlfriend. But he had forgotten who really owned his startup. That oversight had cost him not just his marriage, not just his company, but something perhaps more valuable than either: the carefully cultivated image of himself as the smartest, most capable person in every room, the man who made the rules, rather than following them. As Elizabeth called the meeting back to order, preparing to formally address the governance issues at hand, I caught Daniel's eye across the table. In his expression, a mixture of defiance, calculation, and dawning recognition, I saw that he finally understood what his betrayal had awakened in me, what his deception had catalyzed among those he had underestimated. He had created this moment through his choices, his arrogance, his belief that rules applied to others, but not to him. And now he would face the consequences, not alone in a private confrontation where his manipulative skills might prevail, but in this room full of witnesses, bound by professional standards and legal obligations that transcended personal loyalties. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability, long overdue and necessary for everyone involved, including Daniel himself. The formal board meeting proceeded with a structured precision that belied the emotional undercurrents running through the room. Elizabeth Winters, displaying the leadership that had made her a successful venture capitalist, guided the discussion through proper parliamentary procedure, despite Daniel's occasional attempts to derail the process. "We need to establish a clear picture of TechVault's current financial position," Elizabeth said, turning to Jacob, "particularly any agreements or commitments involving Vision Tech that might impact company operations." Jacob nodded, accessing the company's financial dashboard on his tablet. The initial contract with Vision Tech was executed 3 weeks ago, authorizing a $50,000 retainer for preliminary market analysis. No further payments have been processed through TechVault's accounts. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. However, there are several pending invoices in the system awaiting approval, totaling approximately $420,000 for the next phase of marketing services. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Those invoices reflect the comprehensive rebranding strategy we discussed last month. The board approved the marketing initiative." "We approved the initiative," Elizabeth corrected, "not the specific vendor selection or contract terms. Those details were left to management, with the understanding that proper procurement procedures would be followed, including disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest," Rebecca added. I studied the financial data Jacob had displayed on the conference room screen. Something about the timing nagged at me. "Jacob," I said, "when did TechVault receive the final Series A funding transfer?" 4 weeks ago, he replied. "The last tranche of $5 million was deposited on the 15th. And the Vision Tech contract was executed 1 week later," I noted. connections forming in my mind. Right after the money was secured, Elizabeth's eyes narrowed as she followed my reasoning, suggesting that Daniel waited until the investment funds were safely in TechVault's accounts before implementing this arrangement. She turned to Daniel. Were you concerned that disclosing your Vision Tech connection might jeopardize the funding? His expression confirmed my suspicion before he could formulate a denial. Daniel had deliberately timed his moves, waiting until TechVault's financial position was secure before executing his plan to funnel money into his secret company. As the meeting progressed, we methodically gathered information from each person present. Jacob provided detailed financial records showing TechVault's cash position, outstanding obligations, and projected runway. Trevor reluctantly described the development timeline for their enterprise security product, confirming that while Daniel had been the public face of the company, the technical innovations had been collaborative efforts. Vanessa, still visibly shaken by the revelations about her own company's ownership structure, nevertheless delivered a composed overview of the marketing strategy she'd developed, work that was genuinely impressive and potentially valuable to TechVault's growth. With each presentation, with each piece of information shared, the picture became clearer. TechVault was a promising company with solid technology, talented personnel, and significant market potential. Its primary vulnerability was its flawed governance structure, specifically, the concentration of power in Daniel's hands without adequate oversight. "I'd like to call Caroline Rodriguez," I said during a brief pause in the proceedings. "TechVault's lead attorney should be present for these discussions." Daniel's eyes flashed with alarm. "That's not necessary. We have Rebecca here already." "Ms. Caldwell represents me personally," I corrected. "We need TechVault's corporate counsel to advise the board on its fiduciary responsibilities." Elizabeth nodded approvingly. "A wise precaution. Trevor, would you ask Caroline to join us?" As Trevor stepped out to make the call, Daniel leaned across the table toward me, lowering his voice. "You're making a mistake, Ellie. This scorched earth approach will damage everything. The company, our reputation, Aiden's future. This isn't scorched earth, Daniel," I replied quietly. "Scorched earth would be pressing criminal charges for financial misconduct, which the evidence certainly supports. Instead, I'm offering a path forward that protects the company while addressing the governance failures your actions have exposed." He started to respond, but the conference room door opened, admitting Caroline Rodriguez, TechVault's corporate counsel, a sharp-minded attorney with a reputation for uncompromising ethics. I'd met her at company events but had never interacted with her professionally. "Ms. Rodriguez," Elizabeth said after brief introductions, "we're addressing some concerning governance issues involving conflicts of interest and unauthorized financial activities." Caroline's expression remained professional as Rebecca provided a succinct summary of the situation, along with supporting documentation. When she finished, Caroline turned to Daniel, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Mr. Mercer, did you disclose your ownership interest in Vision Tech to the board prior to executing a service agreement between the two companies?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. "And the $287,000 transferred from your joint account with Ms. Mercer, was she aware of, and did she consent to this transaction?" "That's a personal matter," Daniel deflected. "Not when the funds were used to capitalize a company doing business with TechVault," Caroline replied crisply. "The commingling of personal and corporate interests creates significant legal exposure, both for you personally and potentially for the company." She turned to the broader group. "Based on the information presented, I must advise the board that this situation represents a material breach of fiduciary duty by the CEO. The board has not just the right, but the obligation to address it through appropriate governance measures." Daniel's face flushed with anger. "You work for me, Caroline, for TechVault." "I represent TechVault, the corporation," she corrected, unfazed by his tone. "My professional and ethical obligations are to the entity itself, not to any individual executive." It was another pillar of support Daniel had counted on that proved structurally unsound. the assumption that the corporate attorney's loyalty would overrule her professional ethics. As Caroline reviewed the restructuring proposal I'd presented, offering suggestions to strengthen its legal framework, I observed Daniel's increasing isolation at the table. The network of allies he had cultivated, through charm, through promises, through projected confidence, was dissolving in the face of documented misconduct and his own revealing reactions. The knowledge gathering continued, each new piece of information further clarifying both TechVault's strengths and the extent of Daniel's inappropriate actions. By midday, we had assembled a comprehensive picture. TechVault's core technology remained valuable and competitive. The company's finances were fundamentally sound. Despite Daniel's attempts to divert resources, the leadership team beyond Daniel was capable and committed to the company's mission. The legal and governance issues, while serious, were containable with appropriate action. With this foundation of shared understanding, Elizabeth guided the discussion toward decision-making. Based on the information presented, I believe we must take formal action to address these governance failures, she said, looking around the table. Ms. Mercer has presented a restructuring proposal that offers a pragmatic path forward. Are there alternative approaches we should consider before proceeding to a vote? The silence that followed was telling. Even Daniel, for once, seemed at a loss for counterproposals. The evidence was too clear, the pattern of misconduct too established, the support for change too broad. As I looked around the table at this unlikely coalition, the investor, the technical co-founder, the CFO, the marketing director, the corporate counsel, I recognized that something remarkable had happened during this intense morning of knowledge gathering. What had begun as my individual stand against betrayal had evolved into a collective commitment to building something better from the ruins of broken trust. Daniel had emptied our account for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten who really owned his startup. That oversight had cost him not just his personal control of TechVault, but the professional respect of everyone in the room, a currency perhaps even more valuable to a man defined by others' perceptions of his success. Elizabeth cleared her throat, bringing the discussion back to its central purpose. I believe we're ready to move forward with a formal resolution regarding leadership changes. Ms. Rodriguez, would you please prepare the appropriate documentation for a board vote? As Caroline nodded and began drafting the necessary legal language, I caught Daniel's eye across the table. For a brief moment, I glimpsed something unexpected in his expression. Not just anger or calculation, but a flicker of genuine regret. Not for getting caught, but perhaps for the cascade of poor choices that had led us to this moment. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even necessarily remorse. But it was perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that actions have consequences, even for those who have spent a lifetime believing themselves exempt from ordinary accountability. And in that moment, I realized that what I felt toward him was no longer the raw pain of betrayal or the cold determination of vengeance, but something more complex. A sadness for what might have been, coupled with resolve about what needed to be. As Caroline drafted the board resolution, a brief recess was called. The morning's intense discussions had left everyone drained, and Elizabeth suggested a 30-minute break before the formal vote. I stepped into the hallway, needing a moment away from Daniel's alternating glares and calculating glances. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. How's it going? Aiden's asking when you'll be back. I smiled at the thought of my son, grateful for my brother's steadying presence in his life during this upheaval. Almost done, I replied. Board vote coming up. Should be home by late afternoon. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I sensed someone approaching and looked up to find Vanessa standing nearby, her posture tentative. May I speak with you for a moment? She asked, her voice low. Privately? My instinct was to refuse. What could Daniel's girlfriend possibly have to say that I needed to hear? But something in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the polished exterior, made me nod and follow her into an empty meeting room. I owe you an apology, she said once the door closed behind us. A profound one. I didn't know about the money, about where it came from, and I certainly didn't know about Aiden. She twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture at odds with her usual composure. Daniel told me you two were separated, that it was amicable, that you'd agreed to part ways once TechVault went public. I wasn't surprised. The lies Daniel had told her aligned perfectly with the pattern of deception he'd established. When did your relationship with Daniel begin? I asked, not accusingly but seeking to understand the timeline. 3 months ago, she admitted. Shortly after I was hired. He was so attentive, so interested in my ideas, so seemingly transparent about his situation. She laughed bitterly. I prided myself on not being the kind of woman who gets involved with married men. Turns out, I just wasn't the kind of woman who knows she's involved with a married man. The timeline matched what Michael had discovered, Vision Tech's incorporation 3 months ago, coinciding with the beginning of their affair. But something still didn't add up. The marketing role at TechVault, was that real? I asked. Very real. I was headhunted from Meridian Tech, offered a substantial salary increase and equity options. She hesitated. Daniel didn't handle my recruitment. It was through a search firm. I met him after I'd accepted the position. This detail surprised me. Daniel hadn't created the marketing director role as a pretext to pursue Vanessa. Their relationship had developed afterward. It was a small distinction, but somehow significant. One less layer of calculated deception in what had seemed a completely orchestrated betrayal. And Vision Tech? I prompted. Vanessa sighed, leaning against the conference table. That was Daniel's idea, pitched about 6 weeks into our relationship. He said TechVault's marketing needs were expanding beyond what one internal director could handle. He proposed we create an agency together, me bringing the expertise, him providing the startup capital. We'd service TechVault as our anchor client but eventually expand to other tech companies. She shook her head, the regret evident in her expression. It seemed like such an exciting opportunity. My own agency, backed by someone I thought I could trust. Her voice hardened. What I didn't know was that he'd structured Vision Tech to give himself 80% ownership, not the 60% we'd agreed to, or that the startup capital was coming from your joint savings. I was silent for a moment, absorbing this new information. Vanessa had been manipulated, certainly, but she'd also been complicit, albeit unwittingly, in the dismantling of my family's financial security. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Because you deserve the truth, she replied simply, and because I have information you should know before the board vote. She pulled a folded document from her jacket pocket and handed it to me. I found this in Daniel's Vision Tech office last night when I was looking for our original ownership agreement. I unfolded the paper to find a draft contract between Vision Tech and a company called Nexus Systems, dated 2 weeks ago. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essence was clear. Vision Tech would license TechVault's security protocols to Nexus Systems for implementation in Asian markets in exchange for substantial licensing fees. He was planning to sell TechVault's proprietary technology through Vision Tech, I said, the implications becoming clear, bypassing TechVault's governance structure entirely. Vanessa nodded grimly. The Nexus deal would have generated millions in licensing fees, money that should rightfully go to TechVault and its shareholders, but would instead flow through Vision Tech, where Daniel controls 80%. Have any agreements been finalized? I asked, my mind racing with the legal and financial implications. Not yet. But there are emails scheduling a signing meeting for next week. She hesitated. I should have questioned this more when he first mentioned it. The arrangement never made sense. Why would a marketing agency be handling technology licensing? But Daniel has a way of making the questionable seem reasonable, of making you doubt your own judgment. I knew exactly what she meant. That had been Daniel's particular talent throughout our marriage, presenting his perspective so persuasively that alternative viewpoints seemed inherently flawed. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I said, refolding the document. "This changes the nature of Daniel's actions significantly." "I know," she replied quietly. "It crosses the line from unethical to potentially illegal. That's why I had to show you." She straightened her shoulders. "I want to be clear. I'm not sharing this to curry favor or to secure my position. If the board decides to terminate VisionTech's contract entirely, I'll understand." Her candor surprised me. Despite everything, I found myself respecting her professional integrity, her willingness to face consequences, even for actions she hadn't fully understood when taking them. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Restart," she said simply. "Rebuild my career, my reputation, my life, without shortcuts or compromised ethics." She managed a small smile. "I'm good at what I do. The marketing strategy I developed for TechVault is solid. Whether that work continues under the current circumstances is for the board to decide, but I won't disappear quietly to make this situation less uncomfortable for anyone." As we returned to the main conference room, where board members were beginning to reassemble for the vote, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The document Vanessa had provided, evidence of Daniel's intention to essentially steal TechVault's intellectual property through his shadow company, transformed the situation from a matter of poor governance to one of potential corporate espionage. Rebecca reviewed the document quickly, her expression growing grave. "This significantly escalates the seriousness of Daniel's actions," she murmured. "We need to share this with the board immediately." I nodded, but as I prepared to present this new evidence, the conference room door burst open. Daniel strode in, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. Tall, immaculately dressed in a bespoke suit, carrying a leather portfolio with a prestigious law firm's logo embossed on the cover. "Before we proceed with any vote," Daniel announced, his voice carrying a renewed confidence, "I'd like to introduce Martin Whitfield, my personal attorney. He has some perspectives on today's discussions that the board should consider carefully." The FI attorney stepped forward, his manner polished and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've reviewed the situation as presented by Mr. Mercer, and I must caution against hasty action. While certain procedural irregularities may have occurred, they fall well within the bounds of standard entrepreneurial flexibility. More concerning is the potential breach of Mr. Mercer's employment agreement, which guarantees his position as CEO for a minimum 3-year term following Series A funding." Elizabeth frowned. "I don't recall such a provision in the documents we signed." "It was in the supplementary agreements," Martin replied smoothly, opening his portfolio to extract a document. Page 4, Section 12, Paragraph 3. As the attorney distributed copies of the purported agreement, I caught Rebecca's eye. Her slight headshake confirmed my suspicion. This was another of Daniel's manipulations, a last-ditch effort to maintain control through legal maneuvering. Caroline Rodriguez, TechVault's corporate counsel, accepted the document with a professionally neutral expression. "I'll need to verify this against our official records," she said. "This clause wasn't in the standard employment agreement we executed." "It was an addendum," Martin insisted, "signed by Mr. Mercer and Ms. Mercer as majority shareholder." All eyes turned to me. Daniel's expression held a hint of triumph, as though he'd played a trump card I couldn't possibly counter. "I never signed such an addendum," I stated firmly. Martin's smile was practiced, condescending. "Your signature suggests otherwise, Ms. Mercer." As he slid the document toward me, I felt a momentary flicker of doubt. Had I signed something without reading it fully? Had Daniel slipped this past me during one of the countless document signings that had punctuated TechVault's growth? I examined the signature page, and the doubt vanished instantly. "This isn't my signature," I said, looking up to meet Daniel's gaze directly. "It's a forgery." The confidence in Daniel's expression wavered slightly. He hadn't expected such an immediate Definitive rejection. That's a serious accusation, Martin cautioned, one that could have significant legal ramifications if proven false. I welcome the scrutiny, I replied, passing the document to Rebecca. I sign my full name, Eleanor Christine Mercer, on all legal documents. This signature reads Ellie Mercer, which I use only for personal correspondence. No legitimate corporate document would bear that signature. Caroline leaned forward to examine the page. She's right. All of Ms. Mercer's official Tech Vault documentation bears her full legal signature. Our records would flag this inconsistency immediately. Daniel's attorney faltered, clearly not having anticipated this specific challenge. There could be an explanation. Yes, I interrupted. There is an explanation, and it's the same one that accounts for the unauthorized transfer of our savings, the deceptive structuring of Vision Tech, and this. I placed Vanessa's document on the table. A draft agreement to sell TechVault's proprietary technology through Vision Tech to Nexus Systems, bypassing this board and the company's shareholders entirely. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed this new revelation. Daniel's face drained of color, his carefully constructed defense crumbling before our eyes. In his desperate attempt to maintain control, Daniel had inadvertently provided the final piece of evidence needed to ensure his removal, a forged document that revealed not just poor judgment, but potentially criminal intent. It was an unexpected development that transformed what might have been a difficult, contested board decision into an unambiguous imperative. Even Martin Whitfield, hired to defend Daniel's position, seemed to recognize the indefensibility of what had just been exposed. As Caroline collected the forged document for preservation as evidence, as Elizabeth called the meeting back to order with new urgency, as Trevor stared at his longtime friend with undisguised shock, I realized that Daniel's greatest weakness had always been his unshakable belief in his own cleverness, his conviction that he could outmaneuver any opposition, manipulate any situation to his advantage. That same overconfidence that had led him to steal our savings, to betray our marriage, to attempt to circumvent TechVault's governance had now sealed his professional fate in a way no planned strategy could have accomplished more effectively. Sometimes, I reflected as the board prepared to vote, the most powerful unexpected developments aren't external events that happen to us, but the inevitable consequences of our own character flaws finally catching up with us. The next hour unfolded with the precise, methodical rhythm of corporate governance functioning as intended. Caroline Rodriguez, her professional demeanor never wavering despite the dramatic revelations, prepared a series of resolutions for the board's consideration. First, the immediate suspension of Daniel Mercer from all operational duties at TechVault, pending a comprehensive investigation into financial impropriety and potential corporate espionage. Second, the appointment of an interim leadership structure based on my proposed reorganization, with Trevor Barnes elevated to Acting Chief Technology Officer and Jacob Morris to Acting Chief Operating Officer, while a search for a permanent CEO was conducted. Third, the freezing of all agreements between TechVault and Vision Tech, with a committee established to evaluate whether the marketing strategy could be salvaged and implemented internally. Fourth, the initiation of legal proceedings to recover the misappropriated funds and protect TechVault's intellectual property from unauthorized licensing or transfer. As Caroline outlined these measures, I watched Daniel's expression transition from stunned disbelief to cold calculation. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, likely advising him on damage control strategies, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably against him. Before we vote, Elizabeth said, I believe Mr. Mercer should have an opportunity to address the board regarding these allegations and proposed actions. Daniel straightened in his chair, composing himself with visible effort. The charismatic entrepreneur persona that had served him so well reasserted itself, shoulders back, chin up, eyes engaging directly with each person around the table. What we're discussing today, he began, his voice steady and resonant, are Decisions made under the pressure of rapid growth and unprecedented opportunity. I acknowledge that proper procedures weren't always followed, that disclosures should have been more transparent. He spread his hands in a gesture of candid admission. Entrepreneurs push boundaries. We move quickly, sometimes too quickly for traditional corporate governance to keep pace. It was a masterful performance, the visionary leader slightly chastened, but fundamentally unrepentant, asking for understanding rather than forgiveness. In another context, with less damning evidence, it might have been effective. As for the Nexus Systems document, he continued, his tone dismissive, it was merely a preliminary exploration of potential international partnerships, nothing more. The characterization of it as corporate espionage is not just inaccurate, but potentially libelous. His attorney nodded approvingly, clearly having coached this particular talking point. And the forged signature? Elizabeth asked, her tone neutral but her gaze sharp. Daniel hesitated, the first crack in his composed facade. A misunderstanding. If the signature doesn't conform to standard format, we can certainly revisit that particular agreement. It was neither denial nor admission, a calculated ambiguity designed to avoid direct liability while leaving room for negotiation. As Daniel concluded his statement with assurances of his commitment to Tech Vault's success and willingness to find a constructive path forward, I felt a curious detachment. The man speaking so eloquently, so persuasively, was simultaneously familiar and unrecognizable, the husband I had loved and supported for 8 years, yet a stranger whose capacity for deception exceeded anything I had imagined possible. Rebecca leaned close to whisper in my ear, "He's good." Pivoting from defense to negotiation without admitting culpability, classic damage control. I nodded slightly, unsurprised. Daniel had always excelled at reframing narratives to his advantage, at finding the angle that transformed potential disaster into opportunity. It was what had made him successful as an entrepreneur, and what had made him dangerous as a husband. But as the board prepared to vote on the proposed resolutions, I knew his skills would not save him this time. The evidence was too clear, the pattern of deception too established, the potential consequences for Tech Vault too severe to ignore. The critical moment, the vote that would formalize Daniel's removal and initiate the company's transformation, was upon us. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation and lies, I felt no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that necessary consequences were finally catching up to choices long overdue for reckoning. All those. In favor of Resolution 1, regarding the immediate suspension of Daniel Mercer from operational duties, please indicate by raising your hand. Elizabeth's voice carried a weight appropriate to the moment. Trevor's hand rose immediately, followed by Jacob's. Elizabeth herself voted in favor. As majority shareholder, my vote would be decisive, regardless of the others' positions. I raised my hand, my gaze meeting Daniel's across the table. Something passed between us in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that we had reached a point of no return. The charismatic, brilliant man I had married, the father of my child, was being formally removed from the company he had founded. The betrayal that had begun in our personal life had culminated in this professional excision. The resolution passes unanimously, Elizabeth declared. Daniel Mercer is hereby suspended from all operational duties at Tech Vault, effective immediately. Daniel's attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Daniel waved him off. His focus remained entirely on me, his expression unreadable. The remaining resolutions passed with similar unanimity, each vote another brick in the wall now standing between Daniel and the company he had built. When the final vote was tallied, approving the initiation of legal proceedings to recover the misappropriated funds, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Daniel who broke it, his voice surprisingly calm. "I request a moment to speak with my wife privately before I leave." "Ex-wife soon enough," his attorney muttered. gathering his papers with evident frustration. "The board meeting is adjourned," Elizabeth announced, sensing the need for the formal proceedings to end before the personal reckoning began. "Jacob, please escort Daniel to clear out any personal items from his office after his conversation with Ms. Mercer." As the others filed out, leaving Daniel and me alone in the conference room, I braced myself for anger, for accusations, for the manipulative tactics he had employed throughout our marriage. Instead, he simply said, "You outplayed me." There was something almost like respect in his tone, the acknowledgement one chess master might offer another after a decisive defeat. "This wasn't a game, Daniel," I replied. "It was our life, our family, our future." "I know." He looked down at his hands, spread flat on the polished conference table. "I've been asking myself why I did it. Not just the affair with Vanessa or the vision tech structure, but all of it. Why I risked everything we built together." I waited, curious despite myself about what insight he might offer into the destruction he had wreaked. "I think I convinced myself that I deserved more," he continued, his voice quiet. "That the normal rules didn't apply to me because I was special, smarter, more visionary, more deserving of success, however I defined it." He looked up, meeting my gaze directly. "It's a seductive idea that you're exceptional enough to be exempt from consequences." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had said to me in months, an acknowledgement not of external circumstances or temporary lapses, but of the fundamental character flaw that had driven his choices. "What happens now?" he asked. "You know what happens," I replied. "The divorce proceedings will begin next week. The investigation into financial misconduct will determine whether criminal charges are warranted. Tech Vault will continue without you." He nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. "And Aiden? We'll arrange appropriate visitation. He needs his father, despite everything." "But Daniel?" I leaned forward, my voice firm. "If you ever try to use him as a pawn in this situation, if you attempt to manipulate him or turn him against me, there will be consequences far more severe than what you've faced today." Something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps recognition that the woman before him was not the accommodating, conflict-averse wife he had known. The Eleanor who had emerged from this betrayal would protect what mattered, with unwavering resolve. "I understand," he said simply. As he stood to leave, to face the dismantling of the life and career he had sacrificed everything to build, I felt no satisfaction, no triumphant sense of revenge accomplished. Only a quiet certainty that necessary boundaries had been established, that consequences had finally aligned with choices. Daniel had emptied our account for his girlfriend, but had forgotten who really owned his startup. That oversight had cost him everything he truly valued: his company, his reputation, his family. As he walked away, shoulders straight despite the defeat, I wondered if any of the material success he had pursued so relentlessly had been worth the true wealth he had so carelessly discarded. The weeks following the board meeting unfolded with the methodical precision of necessary reconstruction. Legal proceedings moved forward, financial investigations yielded results, and the newly restructured Tech Vault began to find its rhythm under interim leadership. Daniel, stripped of his role and access to company resources, retreated to a rented apartment downtown. According to Michael's discreet inquiries, he had been meeting with investors about a new venture, something in blockchain technology, far removed from Tech Vault's security focus. His attorney had negotiated a settlement regarding the misappropriated savings, resulting in a wire transfer that restored $287,000 to my account 7 weeks after he had emptied it. Vision Tech Marketing dissolved almost immediately, its brief existence a cautionary tale of flawed foundations. Vanessa, true to her word about rebuilding, accepted a position with a respected digital marketing firm in another state. A fresh start away from the wreckage of her involvement with Daniel. The divorce proceedings progressed without unnecessary drama. Daniel, Perhaps recognizing the futility of further conflict, agreed to reasonable terms regarding assets and custody arrangements. Aiden would live primarily with me, with Daniel having weekend visitation and one dinner weekly. It was the best possible outcome for our son, maintaining his relationship with his father while providing the stability he needed during this transition. TechVault itself emerged stronger from the governance crisis. Elizabeth Winters, impressed by the restructuring plan I had developed, suggested I consider a more active role in the company moving forward. "You have a unique perspective," she said over coffee one afternoon. "The vision to see what TechVault could become, coupled with a commitment to proper governance and ethical leadership, those qualities are surprisingly rare in the tech world." Was thoughtful as I considered her suggestion. My nursing career had been fulfilling, but the experience of recent weeks had awakened something previously dormant, an aptitude for strategic thinking, for organizational leadership, for navigating complex situations with clarity and purpose. "I'd need to complete my MBA," I said finally. "The one I put on hold when Aiden was born." Elizabeth smiled. "TechVault has an excellent tuition reimbursement program, and I happen to know the majority shareholder, who might be persuaded to approve it." The biggest surprise came from Trevor Barnes. Without Daniel's overshadowing presence, Trevor's technical brilliance found room to flourish. Under his guidance as acting CTO, TechVault's development team accelerated their work on the enterprise security product, resulting in a breakthrough that industry analysts hailed as genuinely innovative and potentially transformative. "Daniel always said the teams needed his vision to function effectively," Jacob remarked during one executive meeting. Turns out they were just waiting for space to implement their own ideas. As for me, life settled into a new normal. Michael and his family remained a constant support, helping with Aiden and providing the stable foundation we needed while rebuilding our lives. The lake house dream was temporarily shelved, a future possibility rather than an immediate goal, but in its place emerged something more valuable. A clear-eyed understanding of my own capabilities, independent of the roles I had previously defined myself by. 3 months after that fateful 3:17 a.m. bank alert, I stood in my newly purchased townhouse, watching Aiden arrange his toys in his new bedroom. The space was smaller than our previous home, but it was ours, secure, unencumbered by painful memories, a physical manifestation of our fresh start. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Judge signed final divorce decree today. It's official. Felt a complex wave of emotions. Relief, sadness, and underneath it all, a profound sense of completion. The legal severing of ties with Daniel marked the end of one chapter. Yes, but more importantly, it confirmed the beginning of another. Daniel had emptied our account for his girlfriend, but he had forgotten who really owned his startup. That oversight had cost him his company and our marriage, but it had given me something unexpected in return. The discovery of my own resilience, my own capabilities, my own path forward. As I helped Aiden hang his solar system mobile from the ceiling of his new room, listening to his excited chatter about space and planets and possibilities, I realized that the most significant consequence of Daniel's betrayal wasn't the professional fallout or even the end of our marriage. It was the emergence of a stronger, more self-assured Eleanor, a woman who would never again surrender her voice, her value, or her vision to anyone else's definition of who she should be. 1 year after the 3:17 a.m. bank alert that had shattered my world, I stood at the podium in TechVault's newly expanded headquarters, addressing the assembled team members and investors at our annual company meeting. "When we talk about security," I said, looking out at the attentive faces, "we often focus exclusively on technology, on firewalls and encryption protocols, on threat detection and vulnerability management. But true security encompasses something broader. The governance structures that ensure accountability, the transparent processes that build trust, and the ethical foundation that guides decision-making when no one is watching. As TechVault's recently appointed Chief Strategy Officer, a role created after I completed the Accelerated Executive MBA program at the State University, I had spent months collaborating with Trevor, Jacob, and our expanded leadership team to reshape not just what the company did, but how it operated. The changes were both subtle and profound. We had implemented robust financial oversight mechanisms, expanded the board to include independent directors with cybersecurity and ethics backgrounds, and established a company culture that valued thoughtful deliberation alongside innovation. Today, as we celebrate TechVault's most successful year to date, I continued, we recognize that our growth stems not just from technical excellence, but from the foundation of trust we've built with our clients, our investors, and most importantly, with each other. The applause that followed felt like validation, not just of the company's transformation, but of my own. The journey from surgical nurse and supportive wife to corporate strategist and organizational leader had been neither simple nor straightforward. It had required late-night studying after Aiden was asleep, challenging conversations with professors who questioned my unconventional background, and moments of self-doubt when the technical aspects of cybersecurity seemed impenetrably complex. But each obstacle overcome had reinforced what the crisis with Daniel had first revealed. My capacity for growth was limited only by my willingness to embrace discomfort, to venture beyond familiar territories, to reimagine what was possible for my life. After the presentation, Elizabeth Winters approached, her handshake as firm as ever despite the passing year. Exceptional work, Eleanor. The governance framework you've developed should be a case study at business schools. I smiled, appreciating her straightforward praise. Our relationship had evolved from formal board interactions to genuine mentorship, with Elizabeth providing invaluable guidance as I navigated the unfamiliar terrain of corporate leadership. Thank you. It helps to have personal experience with what happens when governance fails. She nodded thoughtfully. The most effective reforms often come from those who've witnessed the consequences of inadequate systems firsthand. She glanced around at the bustling headquarters. Have you heard the latest about Daniel? I had, through the inevitable industry gossip that circulated among tech investors. Daniel's blockchain venture had secured modest initial funding, but was struggling to gain traction in an increasingly crowded market. Without TechVault's established technology base to build upon, he was discovering the challenges of truly starting from scratch. I don't track his career closely, I replied, which was mostly true. While information occasionally reached me, I had made a conscious decision not to monitor Daniel's professional journey. Our interactions were limited to co-parenting discussions about Aiden, whom Daniel saw regularly according to our custody arrangement. Those encounters, once tense and fraught with unspoken recriminations, had gradually evolved into something resembling civil cooperation. Daniel, to his credit, had proven more reliable as a part-time father than he had as a husband, never missing a scheduled visitation and making genuine efforts to engage with Aiden's interests. Fair enough, Elizabeth conceded. I only mentioned it because there are rumors of him approaching some of our investors. Nothing concerning, just something to be aware of. I appreciated the heads up, filing the information away without letting it disturb my focus on the day's success. Daniel's choices, past, present, or future, no longer defined my reality or determined my responses. I had learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, to differentiate between what I could control and what I needed to release. As the event concluded and team members dispersed to their respective departments, I found myself alone in the conference room, the same room where, a year earlier, I had faced the climactic confrontation that had altered the trajectory of both TechVault and my personal life. The symmetry felt significant, a marker of how far I had traveled from that painful moment. The woman who had entered this room in shock and betrayal had been forced to find her voice, to assert her value, to reclaim her power in ways both professional and deeply personal. The woman standing here now, confident in her abilities, clear in her purpose, comfortable with her authority, was still recognizably Eleanor Mercer. But she was also, undeniably, someone new. Someone forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by the gradual, deliberate process of reconstruction. As I gathered my presentation materials, preparing to head home for Aiden's school science fair that evening, I reflected on how completely Daniel's betrayal had backfired. In attempting to sideline me, he had inadvertently pushed me center stage. In undermining my financial security, he had compelled me to secure it independently. In forgetting who really owned his startup, he had forced me to truly own not just TechVault, but something far more valuable: my own story, my own capabilities, my own future. And that, perhaps, was the most profound growth of all: the recognition that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge only when circumstances demand more of us than we believed possible to give. As I look back on the journey that began with that devastating 3:17 a.m. bank alert, I'm often asked what advice I would give to others facing similar betrayals, whether financial, emotional, or both. My answer is never about revenge, though that was certainly my first instinct. It's not about winning or making someone pay for their actions, though accountability remains essential. Instead, it's about recognizing that how we respond to betrayal ultimately shapes us more profoundly than the betrayal itself. When the foundation of your life crumbles, when the person you trusted most proves unworthy of that trust, when financial security evaporates overnight, when the future you envisioned disappears, you stand at a crucial crossroads. You can allow the betrayal to define you, to shrink your world, to make you bitter and suspicious and small. Or you can use it as a catalyst for growth, for self-discovery, for building something stronger than what was broken. The choice isn't always clear in those first raw moments of pain. It wasn't for me. But with each decision, to seek help rather than isolate, to plan rather than react, to build rather than destroy, the path gradually reveals itself. Today, Aiden is thriving in his new normal. TechVault continues to grow under leadership that values integrity alongside innovation. And I've discovered capabilities within myself that might have remained dormant without the unwelcome catalyst of Daniel's betrayal. This isn't to suggest gratitude for the betrayal. Some lessons come at too high a price to inspire thanksgiving. But there is profound power in knowing that someone else's worst choices need not determine your ultimate outcomes. If you're in that dark place right now, if you're reeling from a betrayal that seems to have shattered everything, know this: your story doesn't end here. This painful chapter, this unexpected, unwanted detour, doesn't get the final word on your life unless you grant it that power. You are more resilient than you know, more capable than you believe, more valuable than anyone else's assessment of your worth. Daniel emptied our account for his girlfriend, but he forgot who really owned his startup. His oversight cost him everything, but it showed me what I was truly made of, and that discovery has made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.